A quick top sounds as the man asks what she hopes to gain from him. As the topping continues, he lists her burdens, including a gambling father and difficult siblings.
The man smirks while calling her life tragic, mentioning her mother's struggle with depression.
The blonde woman grips her book tightly as he tells her to go on and enlighten him. He addresses her as Miss Margaret. The dark-haired man questions how he can rescue her from that life. She stands alone before the man at his large office desk. History reveals a notorious parricide who annihilated his entire family. Looking determined, the woman tells the Duke that she does have a desire. With a sharp thud of her hand on the desk, she begins her request. She pleads with the Duke not to kill his younger siblings, Cedric and Cecilia. A dark-haired man in armor excuses himself to speak. He states he is inquiring about a tutor position and asks if she is Miss Estella. Estella says she heard from the butler and offers to guide him. Several significant changes suddenly come into her life this morning. A massive, ornate estate stands under the bright sky. The first change is that she has become the tutor for the Birtle family. Declining family fortunes forced her to find work as a common noble lady. She begins to reflect on the second major change. The woman has regained the memories of her past life. She realizes these memories are far too vivid to be a dream. She recalls a modern world with a completely different level of civilization. Memories return of a country where most people had black hair and eyes. In that place, she worked as a teacher for over 30 children. A sudden crash marks the moment she died after being hit by a truck. A formal greeting sounds as the butler welcomes Miss Estella upon her arrival. The silver-haired man introduces himself as Javier, the butler of the Bertal family. Javier praises her perfect qualifications and neat handwriting while she offers her thanks. He prepares to introduce her to the children as they walk through the manor. She notes that it is a comfortable world where one can teach without a certification. Javier explains her duties regarding Cedric and Cecilia, noting Cecilia's lessons are like playtime. Estella asks if the young girl is having trouble with her words. Javier explains Cecilia has a limited vocabulary, while Cedric is a healthy but mischievous boy. He assures her that teaching the bright boy should not be much trouble. She internally scoffs at the idea that teaching young boys is anything but hellish. A loud crash echoes in her mind as she recalls the chaos of 21st century kids. Javier stops walking to give her one more serious thing to be cautious about. He warns her that she must ensure she does not cross paths with young Lord Diego. Estella reacts with confusion, asking if he is serious. Javier coughs awkwardly, explaining that while Diego is a gentleman, there are unavoidable circumstances. He mentions the uncomfortable relationship between the half-siblings as she finds the name Diego strangely familiar. A sudden realization causes her to stop in the middle of the hallway. Shock washes over her face as the names begin to connect. The names Cecilia, Cedric, and Diego Berta swirl in her thoughts. With a heavy thought of realization, she recognizes she is in a novel from her past life. She remembers seeing the name Diego Berta in the Dangerous Duke's contract marriage before she died. She tells herself to calm down and try to recall the specific details. She remembers that the previous Duke of Berta was a man of very poor character. The narrative recounts the tragic death of his first wife, Dolores, and his marriage to Anna. The previous Duke was deeply in love with his second wife, the shrewd Anna. Anna had children, Cedric and Cecilia. The Duke wanted Cedric as heir. He even tried to kill Diego. Estella wonders if her memories are a sign to escape from the mansion. A creak sounds as Javier introduces Estella to young Master Cedric and the tutor he mentioned. She reflects on her memories. She fears an early death from the infamous prodigal son, Diego. Cedric mocks the tutor's thick glasses and questions how he can win against demons with her help. She vows to protect her students. Estella walks through the grand estate. A maid called Aunt Gail surprises the blonde woman by calling her Margaret and asking her to come over. Estella asks what is happening as Aunt Gail invites her to take some of the apricots with him. Aunt Gail presents a basket of large, perfectly ripe apricots. Estella is impressed by the huge fruit as the maid explains she's giving them to help the tutor maintain her strength. Aunt Gail praises her skill, but Estella privately attributes her success to her 7 years of past life teaching. A month has passed in the mansion. Her past memories help her survive. A hand opens the heavy door. Estella greets the young master and miss in the study with a pleasant morning greeting. Cedric runs forward excitedly, asking if the tutor brought any snacks specifically for him. Estella clarifies the snack is for Cecilia, leading the boy to wonder if he even exists to her. The boy demands the snack, but the tutor refuses because he previously claimed he found fruit too sour. She reminds him that he once spat out a strawberry, which the boy defends by saying they have too many seeds. Estella reflects that staying with the kids is the best way to avoid the murderous male lead. Diego considers his brother bad luck. She stays safely under the radar. Estella is startled when the boy suddenly sneaks up and begins greedily devouring the fruit. The boy begins to choke and gag with a sudden sound. Panicked, Estella orders him to spit out the pit while Cecilia watches the scene with her toy rabbit. She expresses disbelief that he actually swallowed the pit. Cedric is indignant that she hit and scolded him, but she asks why he would think she was offering praise.
Estella offers Cecilia an apricot and gently reminds her to only eat the flesh and avoid the pit.
Cecilia happily eats the sweet ripe fruit.
Cedric asks his sister if she can even see her brother standing there. The girl ignores her brother completely. The boy stares in stunned silence. Estella notes the chaos as Cecilia begs for more and Cedric continues his dramatic reaction.
The children follow their teacher well.
Estella reflects that despite her initial nerves, these kids are no different from the students she taught before.
Cedric tells her to do whatever she wants as she prepares to start the daily lesson.
A loud bam sounds as the door opens and a woman's voice calls out for her son, Cedric. A beautiful blonde woman smiles warmly while saying, "Oh dear."
The Duchess. Estella greets the Duchess and explains they were just about to begin the morning lesson.
Anna demands to know why Cecilia is in the room with them.
Estella explains that Lady Cecilia was feeling bored and was allowed to observe as long as she wasn't disruptive. Anna speaks directly to the Gaul.
The Duchess mentions hearing about her math studies and asks Cecilia if she has mastered addition yet.
Hugging her rabbit tightly, the girl nervously admits that she has not quite mastered it.
Anna asks why her progress is so slow, and Estella apologizes while explaining the difficulty of the task. The Duchess looks down with a sharp glare and asks the tutor if she is suggesting the child is stupid. Her heart pounding, Estella notes that Duchess Anna of House Berta possesses a fiery temper and is far more dangerous than the Duke.
Estella quickly clarifies that she simply meant Cecilia requires a different educational pace compared to others.
Anna addresses her as Miss Margaret and questions if she intends to instruct the Duchess in the same manner as the children.
As Estella panics about losing her job, Cedric secretly thinks that his sister is indeed slow.
A bead of sweat rolls down Estella's face as the tension in the room thickens. With a firm hand on the desk, Anna asserts that any child unable to speak by the age of 5 is undeniably slow.
Cedric interjects, urging his mother to ignore Cecilia and instead notice his progress with the lineage of Mosquita. The boy flashes a confident smirk while asking if his mother finds his achievement impressive. Estella is visibly shaken, realizing that Cedric is boldly lying about his academic progress. In a side scene, Estella scolds Cedric for exaggerating his progress and calling his mother a devil, though the boy remains unrepentant. Anna leaves the room in a state of satisfaction, while Estella fulfills her promise to carry the young master on her back.
A heavy footstep sounds as Estella struggles with the boy's weight and begs him to stay still.
She worries that falling over while carrying him would result in a total disaster.
A sudden thud marks their encounter with a tall, dark-haired man standing in the hallway. Estella's eyes widen in terror as she begins to utter the man's name. She recognizes the man as Diego Berta and wonders why the dangerous figure has appeared at this moment. Diego stands before them with a stern, imposing expression that chills the air. Estella gulps nervously, her thoughts racing as she tries to understand Diego's unexpected presence. Diego identifies her as the new tutor and notes that this is their very first meeting. He casts a sharp, calculating glance toward the woman and the child she is carrying. Cedric and Cecilia shrink back in fear, hiding behind the safety of their tutor's skirt.
Diego mentions he just spoke with his mother and heard of Cedric's incredibly fast progress.
Estella laughs awkwardly and confirms the lie about the boy's studies while screaming internally as the deception grows. Diego listens with a thin, unreadable smile on his face. He addresses Cedric directly, causing the boy to flinch visibly. Diego remarks that his brother no longer acknowledges him, leading Cedric to offer a quiet apology.
He suggests that the tutor should prioritize teaching the children proper manners.
Diego adds that while parents should handle such training, both of Cedric's parents are severely lacking in that area.
Estella reflects on the Duke's history of abuse and affairs, finding herself in silent agreement with Diego's assessment.
She acknowledges the Duchess's complicity, but believes such harsh truths should not be spoken in front of children.
Estella takes a deep, steadying breath to calm her nerves. She addresses Diego as young master and asks if he would like the children to head to the training ground first.
Estella gently encourages the two young siblings to hold hands tightly.
She tells the children to go ahead, watching as they start to move away from the conflict.
Cedric and Cecilia run down the hall as Diego watches them go. Diego states he never gave the children permission to leave, prompting Estella to offer a polite apology.
She begins her rebuttal with a firm and steady tone.
Standing her ground, Estella declares that matters involving adults should only be discussed between adults.
She bows respectfully while promising to place a greater focus on Cedric's manners from now on.
She defends her student by suggesting his behavior stems from his youth and unfamiliarity rather than malice.
Estella celebrates her small victory internally, thrilled that she managed to stand up to the intimidating man.
She reminds herself that the fundamental rule of parenting is to allow children to simply be children. Diego stares at her in silence, making her worry if she is about to be scolded or evicted.
She formally introduces herself as Estella Margaret Montiel and requests that he call her Miss Margaret.
Diego remarks that he finally understands why the butler seems unconcerned about the children's welfare.
To her surprise, he admits that she appears to be teaching her students quite well.
He explains that he manipulated his father's schedule to postpone his mother's planned celebration for Cedric.
Diego suggests that if he assists her, they can finish their work early and secure her a free day tomorrow.
Estella is left completely baffled by his unexpected offer of help.
Diego chuckles with an amused expression.
Diego insists the hardworking tutor attend dinner, leaving Estella stunned. He bids them farewell until dinner and walks away. Estella panics because the lie forced Cedric to study 500 pages. She fears being fired and left penniless if he fails.
A sudden shout sounds as Estella grabs Cedric. At the training ground, Cedric prepares for his lesson. The boy looks confused by the sudden change in pace.
Estella declares an all-nighter, shocking the exhausted young siblings.
Late into the evening, Estella grills Cedric on history. By midnight, the children sleep while Estella keeps working.
Estella gently wakes the sleeping young master up.
She tells Cedric it is time for dinner.
Cedric staggers away, feeling nauseous, while Estella urges more reviewing.
She feels proud that Cedric faced his own lie.
Memories of teaching and her past life resurface. Beneath a grand chandelier, Estella prepares for the climax.
A quiet step sounds as they enter the dining hall. The Duke and Duchess sit at the lavish table. The parents seem satisfied with the current state of affairs.
Diego remains silent, watching the entrance with a cold gaze.
Estella enters the room, sensing the main event has begun.
She reflects on the importance of real-life experience for children. Quick steps sound as Cedric and Estella approach the table. A soft thud sounds as the boy takes his seat.
Cedric politely greets his elder brother at the table.
Diego warns Cedric not to disappoint them, stressing Estella out.
Diego notes that the teacher looks exceptionally tired today. Estella feigns innocence, but Diego mentions the lights were on.
A sudden boom sounds as the air grows heavy. Duke Berta praises the newly hired tutor for her work. The Duke mentions Cedric's progress, and Estella responds with modesty.
Estella's gaze sharpens behind her thick, round glasses.
She realizes the parents are blindly praising without verifying anything.
Diego brings up Cedric's fast progress in history specifically.
A nervous gulp sounds as Estella and Cedric freeze.
The Duke demands an answer from Cedric without delay.
Cedric remembers the tutor's intense drilling about the summary notes.
The boy realizes he knows the answer to the question.
Anna confirms that immigrants used illegal means to settle.
The narrative explains Regent Teriosa's harsh punishment turned immigrants into slaves.
A metallic clinking sounds as Cedric explains the country's wealth growth.
Diego mentions the later move to abolish slavery in the kingdom.
Diego asks his younger brother to explain why they abolished it. Cedric groans as he struggles to recall the specific reason.
Estella worries that Diego is trying to humiliate the boy.
She steps in, explaining that the number of slaves had increased. The visual shows how noble greed led to commoner resentment.
Diego asks which king made slave reform his life's work. Cedric confidently answers that the king was Brante II.
A heavy silence hangs over the dining table. Estella wears a triumphant smile behind her glasses.
Estella is overjoyed that her strategy for training Cedric was a complete success.
Memories show Estella teaching the exhausted Cedric the king's genealogy through a rhythmic song.
A quick clap sounds as Duchess Anna expresses her genuine amazement at the boy's progress.
The Duchess tells Diego she hopes Cedric can soon assist him with his official duties.
Diego remarks that Cedric appears to have been diligent in attending all his classes lately.
Cedric stares back at his elder brother with a sharp, determined gaze.
Cedric explains that he was inspired to work harder after hearing of Diego's youthful talent. The boy looks absolutely radiant as he enjoys his moment of success.
Diego looks stunned by the compliment, while Estella trembles in panic at Cedric's bold words.
Duke Berta laughs heartily, pleased to see such friendly interaction between the brothers.
The Duke invites everyone to enjoy dinner and declares he wants to drink plenty tonight.
He promises Estella a promissory note as a reward and tells her to visit his office.
High-pitched laughter sounds as the parents drink while Estella collapses from exhaustion.
A heavy footstep sounds as Estella complains about the Duke's absence from his office. She imagines the Duke and Duchess continuing their drinking party in a separate room.
Estella reflects on how her regret over past poverty drove her to seek this money.
She reflects on the Duke's impending death and her refusal to remain near the dangerous Diego.
Estella chuckles while planning to fill her pockets and run away with the children.
She decides to wait a while longer for the Duke inside his dark study.
A soft slide sounds as she pushes the large door open.
A sudden creak sounds as Estella gasps in surprise at what she sees inside. She finds Diego sitting by the window light, quietly reading a book about royal design.
Diego remains focused on his reading as the library is bathed in blue moonlight.
The young master sits alone, surrounded by the silence of the massive library.
A sudden gasp sounds as Estella nervously asks why the young master is in the library.
Diego asks if it is strange for him to visit his own library to read before bed.
He offers a thin, knowing smirk as he addresses the tutor as governess.
Estella tries to leave immediately, terrified of spending time with the man she calls a murderer.
A quick tick sounds as Diego closes his book and admits she surprised him earlier.
Diego stands up and notes that he is well aware of Cedric's previous lack of interest.
Estella suggests that it was as if some kind of magic happened for Cedric overnight.
A quick thud sounds as Diego steps closer, causing Estella to flinch in fear.
Diego asks the tutor why she keeps trying to move away from him.
He remarks that her assessment may be true in general, but has exceptions.
Diego leans in very close and tells her that he cannot see her eyes. Estella stares up at him in shock as he offers a subtle, amused smile.
Diego reaches for her face and complains that her thick glasses are in the way.
Estella is privately fuming, considering her thick glasses a stylish and essential tool.
A tense silence falls as Estella clenches her fist at his disrespectful comment.
Diego asks if it isn't actually a good thing if his younger brother wants to learn.
The two stand together in the middle of the dark, moonlit library.
Estella wonders if Diego actually believes they are a real family.
Diego asserts that the two are family after all, while maintaining his cold expression.
Blood-red memories show the gruesome scene where the children were originally slaughtered. Diego notes that she seems far too decent to belong in this cruel household. Estella starts to explain that she is simply trying to do her job as a teacher.
Diego tells her to look at the site and warns her to just leave it alone. He suggests that someone is planning to cripple the boy before he grows anymore.
Estella realizes the voices are coming from the Duke's office.
A look of pure terror crosses the tutor's face. Diego notes he heard a noise and asks for an explanation. Estella frantically claims there is a rat inside the wall.
Diego expresses doubt that the voices sounded like a rat.
Estella panics about the young master hearing the conversation. A quick tap sounds as Diego covers his own ears.
Estella holds Diego's head as a voice mentions hiring an assassin. A sudden boom sounds while the speaker mentions the self.
A voice declares Diego will soon be dead or crippled.
A soft slide sounds as Estella holds the young master. Diego admits he finally understands the tutor's rat excuse.
Diego coldly tells her to forget what she just heard.
The young master's gaze remains distant and somber.
Estella reflects on the tragedy that ruined the family.
She realizes Diego had to kill first just to survive. Diego warns her that she will not leave alive if she uses this. Estella tentatively asks if the young master is truly okay. Diego questions why she would even ask such a thing.
A sharp click sounds as Diego reaches for the door.
Diego advises her to find another job for her sanity.
A sudden tuck sounds as the door shuts behind him. Cedric asks what is wrong with his distracted teacher.
Estella wonders what her student is referring to exactly.
Cedric notes that the tutor smells strongly of alcohol. Estella frantically checks her own clothes while Cedric stares. Estella drinks to cope with the unsettling events of yesterday. She admits to herself that she has been too relaxed. The children ask if their teacher is feeling sick. Estella decides she must devise a far better plan.
Diego sits at his desk while focusing on his work.
A sudden flap sounds as Diego prepares to dress. He wonders if the butler has already arrived. A quick gasp sounds as Estella enters the room.
Estella remains determined to speak with him today.
A sudden thud sounds as she sees the young master.
Estella panics and calls out to the young master.
Diego is startled by the tutor's unexpected presence. Diego asks why the tutor has come to see him.
Estella nervously explains that she has a favor to ask. She starts by commenting on the beautiful garden weather.
Diego assumes she is another woman trying to get close.
He suspects she is seeking leverage from the earlier incident.
A soft rustle sounds as the light catches the window.
Estella prepares to deliver her request with enthusiasm. Estella suggests taking his younger siblings on a namen.
Diego is completely blindsided by the word outing.
He asks why he should ever join such an emet.
Diego looks at the tutor with a serious expression.
Estella reveals that she overheard the conversation behind the wall.
Diego asserts that anything the tutor overheard cannot be used as leverage against him.
Estella clarifies she is not making threats, but is instead offering a mutually beneficial deal.
A look of shock crosses Diego's face as the tutor reveals her knowledge about a spy in Marquis Beautre's household. Estella secretly reflects on how she gained this information from the original story, knowing the young master wouldn't suspect the source.
The narrative explains the deep political ties between Marquis Beautre and Diego's mother, making an internal investigation nearly impossible for the young master.
Diego questions what the tutor stands to gain from this exchange, sensing its immense importance to her.
The young master lets out a long before asking what the woman wants from him in return for the information.
Estella simply requests that Diego spends the remainder of the decade with his younger siblings.
Diego is stunned by the small request and quickly agrees, though Estella knows childcare is a far more difficult task than he imagines.
A nervous gulp sounds as Cedric stares intensely at his tea, looking deeply uncomfortable. A series of soft hiccups sound as the young miss trembles in fear while hiding her face. Diego addresses the tutor as Miss Margaret while maintaining a cold and imposing presence.
A picnic is spread across the grass as Estella explains that enjoying nature is a vital part of her outdoor lessons.
The young master and his siblings watch with suspicion as Estella presents a large plant encyclopedia.
Estella calls for the attention of the young master and young miss.
She announces that they will be spending the afternoon learning about various plant species. Cedric questions the utility of such a lesson, but Estella insists it is essential knowledge for social graces and gardening.
A soft rustle sounds as Estella points out the specific illustrations within the book.
She explains that the lesson is now a game where the winner is whoever finds the most matching flowers.
The young miss tentatively asks what the winner will receive for their efforts. Estella promises that the winner can choose their own prize, such as a special snack or even a pass to skip a future lesson. A quick snap sounds as the tutor tells the children to prepare themselves.
Heartbeat sounds thump as the children wait, then a sudden thud sounds as they sprint into the woods at Estella's command.
Diego remarks that offering a lesson pass as a reward in front of the employer is a particularly bold strategy.
Estella asks the young master why he is remaining idle while the others have already started.
She continues to tease him, asking if he truly intends to just sit and watch the game.
Diego scoffs, asking if she truly expects him to pore over a worthless book just to uncover a name. A sharp click sounds as Diego wonders aloud if this is Estella's way of retaliating for his earlier testing of Cedric. Estella ignores his complaints and points out that the young miss has already found her first flower. A sudden thud sounds as Diego curses under his breath and stands up to join the game. A quick rustle sounds as Diego warns Estella that if he ever grows to hate teaching, it will be entirely her fault. Estella is left shivering in fear, realizing she has pushed the dangerous young master nearly to his limit. A soft rustle sounds from within the dense garden foliage. Cecilia diligently searches through the bushes for the plants shown in the book. A joyful shout sounds as the young girl discovers a small pink flower. A sudden rustle sounds as Cecilia's expression shifts to one of pure surprise.
The young miss gasps as a shadow looms over her from the nearby brush. A sharp intake of breath sounds as Cecilia's eyes widen in alarm. A heavy footstep sounds as Diego suddenly appears before his young sister.
A soft rustle sounds as Diego calls out to Cecilia with a knowing look. The young miss trembles as her older brother notes that she has already gathered a significant number of flowers.
A sudden thud sounds as Cecilia frantically refuses to show her collection to her brother.
Diego asks why she is reacting so defensively and if she truly believes he would steal from her.
A soft slide sounds as the young master reaches out his hand toward his sister. Cecilia is mesmerized by the thought of gifts, unaware that Diego is using his darker charms to coerce her into giving him her flowers. A sudden rustle sounds as Diego is startled by an unexpected interruption.
A heavy thud sounds as Cedric arrives, staring in disbelief at the scene before him.
A sharp intake of breath sounds as Cedric accuses his elder brother of blatant cheating.
Cedric is horrified to see his supposedly exemplary brother's darker side, while Diego remains smugly indifferent.
Cedric shouts for Estella and accuses his older brother of trying to cheat by using Cecilia's flowers.
A sudden sharp tap sounds as the young master covers his brother's mouth.
A muffled sounds as Diego tries to bribe Cedric into silence while Cecilia watches in bewilderment.
A sudden sounds as Diego realizes he has been caught.
Estella stands triumphantly in the distance, noting that she has caught him once again.
Estella looks down at the young master with a look of severe disappointment.
She asks if he truly intended to win the game by threatening his own younger siblings.
A sudden gasp sounds as Cedric finally breaks free from his brother's grip.
Cedric complains about almost choking, while Cecilia reflects on seeing her intimidating brother get scolded by their teacher.
The young miss stares up with wide, shimmering eyes. A soft sounds as Cecilia offers her flowers to her brother while apologizing.
Diego stares at the small bouquet with a silent and thoughtful expression.
Estella watches the scene unfold while feeling a sense of deep confusion.
A soft cough sounds as Diego questions if the rule wasn't to collect the flowers themselves.
The teacher reacts with a look of pure astonishment.
Cecilia's eyes sparkle as she excitedly mentions seeing a scene just like this in a fairy tale.
Diego drops to one knee and offers the bouquet of flowers to Estella.
The children cheer loudly, convinced that their brother has just confessed his feelings to the teacher.
Estella frantically denies the accusation while the children look on with starry-eyed excitement.
Diego watches the tutor's panicked reaction with a calm and calculating gaze.
Diego claims he has no idea what she is talking about, while Estella finds the whole situation incredibly strange. The children continue to tease their teacher, telling her she can be honest about the romantic gesture.
Diego scoffs and asks who would understand a child's heart if the teacher herself cannot.
Estella shifts the conversation back to business and demands to know the identity of the spy.
A soft sounds as she reveals the spy is Lord Franchel, prompting Diego to ask for the motive.
She explains that the spy believes Diego is actively pursuing the inheritance of the Marquise.
Narrative text explains the Marquis of Beautre's failing health and how the death of the eldest son has left the inheritance in question.
Diego closes his eyes while letting out a heavy, weary sigh. Diego notes the revelation isn't surprising since his great-uncle never liked him or his mother.
He explains that while his grandfather was fond of the great-uncle, his mother was the one truly adored.
Estella looks at him with curiosity and asks what his mother was actually like.
Estella recalls that the original story only ever described Diego's mother as being unattractive.
Diego pauses for a moment before beginning his description.
A soft sounds as Diego describes his mother as having been an incredibly wise woman. The young master looks away with a surprisingly soft and distant expression.
Estella is struck by the realization that Diego is capable of showing such genuine affection.
A sudden sounds as Diego asks why she is staring, causing Estella to frantically deny it. Diego points out her awkwardness with the flower, while Estella claims she is simply trying to preserve it. Estella explains that in her homeland, people assigned symbolic meanings to flowers known as the language of flowers. Diego holds up a white flower and asks what its specific meaning would be. Estella reveals that the flower symbolizes peace at home, a concept that seems far from their reality. A sudden sounds as Estella panics and tries to take the flower back to throw it away.
A sudden thud sounds as Diego grabs her wrist and asks why she would discard it.
Estella's eyes widen as she notices a fresh scar and blood on the young master's wrist.
Diego pulls his hand back and asks if anything could truly surprise her after what he heard in the study.
A sudden gasp sounds as the tutor realizes the gravity of his words. A heavy thud sounds as Diego reveals that an assassin came to see him the previous night. The young master maintains a cold stare as he recounts the late-night assassination attempt.
Estella frantically asks how many attackers there were and if he was seriously injured in the struggle.
Diego remains calm and explains that he knew about the attack in advance, so he wasn't badly hurt. Diego claims his wrist injury is unimportant. A soft sounds as Estella asks why he looks so strange.
Diego was a flat novel villain. Thought bubbles explain Diego is too multifaceted to be described simply as they sit in the garden.
Diego clenches his hand tightly.
Cecilia hugs Estella and calls a teacher.
A soft yawn sounds as Cecilia admits she is sleepy.
Estella asks Cedric if he wants to nap, and he agrees.
Estella tells the kids to lie down. Estella watches the children sleep. The siblings sleep on the blanket. Diego notes how well they sleep in broad daylight.
Estella explains that children tire out very easily. Estella suggests even the Duke had similar times, while Diego agrees.
Diego watches his sleeping sister.
Diego pokes his sisters on. Estella reflects on the peaceful day and wonders if it is okay to have hope. Her voice sounds softly as she says next time. Estella asks if they can have another event like this outing.
Diego addresses her as Miss Margaret and gives a firm refusal. Estella looks completely stunned.
Diego tells the teacher not to do that.
Diego pulls his sleeve down while declaring this is the last day for such outings.
Diego stands up and ends the session. A heavy step sounds as the young master walks away. Diego thinks to himself that he finally understands. Diego suspects the woman is threatening him and doesn't actually want to sit with him. Diego believes the others only feel pity for him.
He reflects on how she values family unity because she believes children deserve to be loved.
Diego views her as someone who will clearly interfere with the big project.
He worries she will stop him from moving the kids out of the mansion.
Diego's eye narrows with intensity.
A blood-stained vision appears.
Diego recalls the butler saying the tutor was from the north.
He plans to send her back to her hometown on the day they carry out the mission. Diego finds the situation absurd.
He questions why he should show consideration for a woman who has nothing. Diego dismisses his useless fox.
Diego walks back to the mansion.
Elegant halls are filled with music. Cedric walks the hallway.
Cedric notes that today is a feast day while the mother and father are out and free.
Cedric reflects on how he has grown taller while Cecilia has become more talkative.
Cedric feels closer to his mother.
He recalls being embarrassed when the teacher first brought Diego to the outdoor class.
Cedric remembers how Diego stayed with him until nap time.
Cedric opens a door while noting they are getting closer and closer.
Cedric stops as he spots his mother.
A woman stands in the library.
A heavy thud sounds as the woman invites her son closer to talk. A heavy thud sounds as the blonde woman invites her son closer.
She explains that she intentionally stayed behind to speak with him privately.
A soft click sounds as she notes that the other children's lessons were postponed.
The mother praises Cedric for his performance at the family dinner.
A soft slide sounds as she declares him the natural successor to the title. A sudden gasp sounds as she prepares to issue a significant warning.
The woman commands her son to never praise Diego in front of his father.
Cedric reacts with a look of pure, wide-eyed astonishment. A sharp click sounds as she explains his father's deep hatred for his brother. A heavy thud sounds as Cedric declares his lack of interest in titles.
The blonde woman snorts dismissively at her son's repeated lack of ambition.
Cedric shouts that he is incapable of handling such a heavy responsibility.
He argues that his older brother is far superior to himself.
A soft gasp sounds as Cedric defends his brother's right as the eldest. A sudden gasp sounds as the boy notes his mother's terrifying expression. Cedric recalls his tutor's gentle comfort regarding his future as the young master.
A heavy thud sounds as the young boy remains deeply conflicted. She questions his naive belief that yielding the title would create a family.
A sudden gasp sounds as she warns of his vulnerability without her protection.
Cedric refuses to believe his brother would ever be merciless toward him.
A sharp intake of breath sounds as she screams at him to stop lying.
Cedric insists that his relationship with his brother is genuinely comfortable.
He recalls the peaceful outing they shared together in the garden.
A sharp click sounds as Cedric asks why they cannot get along.
The mother's eyes narrow as she blames the tutor for his behavior.
A soft bubble sounds as a thick meat stew cooks.
A soft slurp sounds as the cook tastes her culinary creation.
The kitchen worker is startled by an unexpected afternoon greeting.
Estella appears in the kitchen doorway with a polite smile.
A soft click sounds as she explains the postponement of her classes.
A heavy thud sounds as the cook offers her a bowl of stew.
A soft sigh sounds as the tutor expresses her sincere gratitude.
Estella enjoys the meal while sitting alone in the kitchen.
A soft murmur sounds as the cook reveals her long history with the mansion. The tutor asks if the cook remembers the previous mistress of the house.
The cook whispers that the previous madam is a forbidden topic.
Estella claims she was only curious about the woman's true nature.
A soft sounds as the cook describes the previous mistress as noble.
She recounts how the previous madam turned the house into an art gallery.
Estella finds the details of the woman's death to be incredibly suspicious.
A vision of the funeral highlights the suspicious arrival of the new wife.
A sudden gasp sounds as the cook warns her to keep quiet.
The two women share a lighthearted laugh over their shared secret.
The cook notes that the owners have gone to the temple for the holiday.
A soft thud sounds as Estella looks out the kitchen window.
The tutor reflects on the traditional spring festivals of the agricultural country.
Estella's expression shifts as she experiences a sudden, chilling realization.
A sharp click sounds as she recalls the season of the Duke's murder.
A heavy thud sounds as a panicked maid bursts into Varenne. The maid desperately begs the madam to help find the missing Miss Margaret. The Duchess looms over Cedric while searching for Margaret.
A soft gulp sounds as the Duchess glares at Margaret with intense disdain.
Cedric trembles while clutching his book tightly.
Margaret bows while the Duchess mocks her for feigning ignorance with a calm face.
Margaret offers to explain everything if the Duchess tells her what is wrong.
A sharp click sounds as the Duchess approaches the tutor.
A sudden flinch sounds as Cedric cowers in the background.
A sharp click sounds as the Duchess confronts Margaret about Cedric meeting his half-sister. Margaret realizes the secret has finally been discovered. Margaret recalls instructing the children to hide their meetings from the madam.
A sharp click sounds as Margaret regrets underestimating the children's young aides.
Margaret tries to explain the situation, but the Duchess refuses to listen.
A sharp click sounds as the Duchess reminds her of the orders to keep the kids apart.
A soft thud sounds as Margaret bows her head in a deep apology.
A soft snort sounds as Margaret promises to be more careful in the future. Margaret reflects on how noble birth does not make a person special.
Margaret remains bowed while thinking about the Duchess's predictable demand for submission.
The Duchess wonders if she should press the matter further despite Margaret's verbal repentance.
Cedric grabs his mother's dress while insisting that Estella did nothing wrong.
A tight squeeze sounds as Cedric admits he was the one who wanted to see his sister.
Margaret looks at the boy with a look of profound worry. A sharp sting sounds as the Duchess's anger flares at her son's words.
A sharp slap sounds as the Duchess strikes the tutor across the face.
The Duchess warns Cedric that others will suffer the consequences of his mistakes.
Cedric stares at the scene in a state of complete, wide-eyed shock.
A soft choke sounds as the Duchess threatens to bring Cecilia into the discipline. The Duchess turns her cold gaze back toward the tutor.
A sharp click sounds as the Duchess justifies her actions as disciplining Cedric.
A tight squeeze sounds as Margaret asks if Cecilia has been physically harmed before.
The Duchess coldly claims that corporal punishment is a necessary part of parenting.
Margaret shouts that the Duchess is abusing her children, while the Duchess is outraged by her defiance.
A sharp click sounds as Margaret reflects on the cowardice of taking children hostage.
Margaret firmly tells the madam that her behavior is cowardly.
Margaret finally understands why the siblings were so terrified in front of the Duchess. The mansion's cruelty appears to ruin everyone trapped within its walls. Margaret declares that she can no longer follow the Duchess's views on education.
Margaret tells the Duchess to her face that she is an unqualified parent.
Hysterical laughter begins to echo through the library hall. The Duchess laughs mockingly at Margaret's bold and defiant declaration.
A soft chuckle sounds as the Duchess calls the tutor delusional for acting like a parent.
The Duchess commands the tutor to stop lecturing her about her own children. Margaret insists her duty as a teacher is to protect the children from abuse.
The Duchess declares that Margaret is no longer the tutor of the house.
Cedric looks on in horror as the two women confront each other. A soft sniffle sounds as Cedric begins to wipe away his tears.
A heavy thud sounds as Margaret sinks to the floor and lets out a weary sigh.
A sudden whoosh sounds as Margaret tells the young master to come closer. A quick whoosh sounds as Margaret inspects Cedric's arms with a magnifying glass.
Margaret confirms that there are no visible wounds on the boy's arm.
Margaret notes that his legs appear to be unharmed as well. Estella is deeply relieved to find that there are no significant injuries on the boy.
Estella comforts the young master while he reacts to her presence.
Cedric suddenly embraces his teacher while reassuring her that he is fine. The boy holds on to her tightly as the sun shines through the library window.
Cedric tearfully confesses how happy he has been spending time with his teacher.
Estella promises she is not going anywhere even though she has just been fired.
A determined smile spreads across the tutor's face as she looks forward. A rhythmic tapping sounds as Estella walks down the hall while weighing her choices. She considers preventing Diego's future murders while recalling a blood-stained vision. Estella believes that while the task is difficult, it is not impossible to achieve. She realizes saving Duke Berta would guarantee safety for both Cedric and Cecilia.
Cedric is caught off guard by her sudden and serious question.
The boy suggests telling the Duke about the ongoing abuse so a solution can be found.
Estella sadly explains that it won't work because the father already knows the truth. She argues that the Duke's concern for the young master was clear during dinner.
Cedric reveals that his father only uses him as a tool to taunt his older brother.
He notes he is only considered a successor because of his mother's identity.
Estella observes the Duke's cruelty and using a kind facade to torment his eldest son.
She considers letting the Duchess die, knowing Diego will never spare her life.
Estella envisions escaping with the children amidst the inevitable chaos of the mansion.
She hopes for a future where the siblings can grow up safely and see tomorrow. Heavy footsteps echo as a sudden meeting occurs between Estella and Diego in the hallway. She notes Diego's cold demeanor as a man who grew up without any proper care.
A soft rustle sounds as Estella offers a formal bow while addressing him as Your Highness.
A tight squeeze sounds as her hands clench her dress while she reminds herself to be quick. She cryptically tells the red-haired man that he will need a black bow tie.
Diego reacts with visible confusion and annoyance at the tutor's strange advice.
He dismissively insists that he will decide what to wear for himself.
Loud thuds sound as Diego walks past her with a look of stern indifference. Estella plans to use the Duke's death to prove her value and plant a necessary clue.
She recalls a significant and destined handshake from the original story's timeline.
She reflects on Adriana's original proposal of a contract marriage to the prince.
Estella resolved to act ahead of Adriana's arrival to secure her own path.
Her primary goal remains saving the children from their grim and destined fate. A look of sharp intensity and resolve reflects in the tutor's eyes. She decides she won't sit by and watch Diego die a slow and lonely death.
Diego continues walking through the sunlit and ornate corridors of the mansion.
A soft murmur sounds as the mention of the black bow tie lingers in the prince's mind.
Diego meets his hooded accomplice to confirm that the crowd has been successfully moved. The man explains that the guard shift schedule has been sabotaged to leave them alone.
Diego promises a future reward while the accomplice addresses him as the new Duke.
The hooded figure takes his final leave to allow the plan to proceed.
Diego reflects on his father's assumption that he only covets the family title.
A memory of a younger Diego calling for his father flashes briefly across his mind.
He wonders why a parent has become more distant and colder than a total stranger.
He remembers the genuine and lie-free love he shared with his late mother.
The dim and lantern-lit hallway leads him toward his final, fateful confrontation.
A sharp creak sounds as Diego opens the door to a private chamber where a man prays.
Diego announces his arrival by coldly addressing the silver-haired man as father.
The Duke turns with a look of surprise while questioning why Diego has come here.
Diego explains he has something important to say, but the silver-haired man dismissively insists they speak later.
Before departing, the red-haired man pauses to ask his father one final, pointed question. A look of absolute horror crosses the Duke's face as Diego presents a familiar, ornate dagger.
A loud, metallic clang sounds as the sun sets over the peaks of the grand mansion.
The heavy resonance of a second clang sounds through the empty, sun-drenched halls of the estate.
A soft gasp sounds as the silver-haired man stares down in a state of sudden, paralyzing shock.
Diego stands in the dim light of the doorway with blood smeared across his mouth and face. The red-haired man wipes the blood from his chin while maintaining a cold and unwavering gaze. Diego holds the dagger up once more and asks his father if he finally recognizes the blade. The Duke desperately claims he knows nothing about the weapon or anything belonging to his son. Diego lets out a weary sigh while noting that his father seems to have a very poor memory. He brings the sharp edge of the blade closer and asks if this will help the man remember. Diego insists that this scene is exactly the kind of picture his father has always wanted to see. The Duke internally curses his own failure to recall the details of the weapon he once handled. A dark vision reflects the moment the Duke personally handed the knife to an assassin to kill his son.
The silver-haired man realizes Diego is now certain that he was the one who ordered the assassination.
The Duke fumes over the assassin's incompetence before demanding that Diego back off from committing unfilial acts. A soft thud sounds as Diego takes another step forward, causing the terrified man to flinch backward.
Diego looks down at his father and asks if the man has ever truly acted as a parent.
The silver-haired man shouts in outrage, questioning how his son dares to draw a knife against him.
Hysterical laughter erupts from the Duke as he claims he always knew Diego would grow up to be a devil.
He justifies his cruelty by claiming that his past actions were a necessary part of Diego's education. A memory shows a young, weeping Diego calling for his mother while the Duke insists on using force.
A soft whoosh sounds as Diego stands in silence over the sound of his father's mocking laughter.
The red-haired man looks at the blade and asks if this is truly how the Duke's will ends.
The silver-haired man glares upward and spits out one final hateful insult at his eldest son.
A sudden wet quack sounds as a shadow is cast against the wall amidst a spray of blood.
A soft drip sounds as Diego stares at his blood-stained hands and the weapon used for the deed.
He looks down at the body and notes that his father died without ever truly knowing the truth.
A heavy thud sounds as Diego reflects on the curse of being born from such a monstrous man.
The scene shifts to an expansive aerial view of the Berta mansion grounds during the bright morning hours.
The narrator reflects that even a predicted death carries a weight that is anything but trivial.
The sudden passing of Duke Berta plunges the entire household and its many servants into a state of turmoil. The Duchess is driven to madness by the news and remains bedridden until the funeral preparations are complete. A man identified as the assassin Diego hired is shown kneeling while held at spear point by guards.
The culprit is revealed to be a drunk temple worker who confessed to killing the Duke during a shift.
Diego immediately takes charge of the Duke's unfinished business, demonstrating a dazzling and unexpected level of competence.
A soft whisper sounds as the servants discuss the funeral while Estella watches the unfolding chaos. Estella takes on the task of dressing the Duke's children in their somber, black mourning clothes. The tutor gently addresses the young master as he sits quietly on the ornate sofa. She asks him if he is feeling all right, and Cedric softly admits that he is not. Cedric explains he doesn't feel sad because it feels as though a total stranger has passed away.
The boy clutches his vest and wonders how many nights it will take for him to finally feel grief.
Estella suggests he might miss his father eventually, noting that even bad memories can become beautified over time. She turns to the young lady and suggests it is time for her to change her clothes as well.
Cecilia remains slumped against the sofa while groaning that she is completely fed up with the situation.
The tutor begins to mention the Duchess's current state as she reaches out toward the young girl.
A sharp pock sounds as the young lady reacts with a sudden and intense look of defiance. Cecilia abruptly sits up and declares to the tutor that she only did it on a whim. Estella is caught off guard as the young girl stares back with a gaze full of hidden meaning.
The girl looks down with sadness.
Estella addresses Cecilia while wondering if she truly understands the Duke's death. The girl clutches her chest. Today is the last chance for Farewell.
Cedric tells Estella it is okay and suggests they go together. The boy feels his sister is still too young for this.
A rhythmic tap sounds as the group departs.
Estella reflects on how Cedric has also matured too early. The tutor tells Cecilia to stay home and rest. Cedric asks how Cecilia is doing, and Estella confirms she will rest. A soft pat sounds on his hat. Estella feels sad that the boy matured so early. Cedric bashfully insists he has simply grown up.
They watch the Duchess being escorted away. Estella observes the Duchess losing her mind as the woman screams for her to leave the mansion.
Carriages line the road for the funeral. Estella is glad she can attend the funeral.
She plans to meet with Diego.
Estella intends to make a deal with Diego to save the children.
Rain falls heavily over the funeral service.
Diego delivers a eulogy praising his father's reliability and loyalty to the family. He claims the loss will cause long-term suffering.
A tombstone marks the final burial place.
The Duchess internally seethes over the hypocritical words written for the burial.
She suddenly realizes a tombstone could not have been prepared so quickly.
The Duchess suspects her husband did not die naturally. She glares at Diego and wonders why her husband died instead of him. The woman stumbles as she accuses Diego of murder. The Duchess rages that Diego killed for power, while he calmly notes he is also a grieving son. Thunder rumbles as Diego asks how she could say such terrible things.
The Duchess is left speechless and horrified. A sudden thud sounds as the Duchess screams and is restrained.
Guards carry her away while others gossip about her temper and the inheritance.
The crowd whispers about the Duke's greed and favoritism while Estella protects Cedric.
Whispers fill the air as the crowd acknowledges Cedric's presence.
A tight squeeze sounds as Estella holds the boy while Diego warns against dishonoring his father's cherished ones.
A man apologizes, claiming they only spoke out because of the Duchess's rudeness.
Heavy footsteps sound in the pass. Diego approaches and calls out to Cedric.
He asks if the boy is all right, and Cedric confirms he is.
Diego asks about Cecilia, and Estella explains the girl refused to come. Diego thinks that since the guardians are unstable, the children cannot be blamed.
Estella observes the perfect play Diego has orchestrated. She feels unwilling to join his stage.
Estella decides she must shake up the performance. She resolves to step up as she notices Diego's attire.
Estella notes that the black bow tie she mentioned was necessary after all. She observes that the tie turned out to be a must. Diego remains silent before letting out a soft laugh. Estella tells Diego they have much to discuss regarding the children.
Rhythmic footsteps sound as a plan is set in motion to meet privately and discuss the future.
A woman with silver hair watches from the shadows of the graveyard while rain falls steadily.
Estella wonders if her presence has finally piqued Diego's interest enough to begin a successful negotiation. The mysterious hooded figure maintains a steady, blue-eyed gaze toward the proceedings of the funeral.
Estella notices the hooded woman watching Diego with unsettling intensity and wonders who she might be.
A glimpse reveals long, silver hair and a single, bright blue eye hidden beneath the dark hood.
Shock washes over Estella as she recognizes the woman as Adriana, the true heroine of the story.
She realizes that Adriana's appearance marks a major turning point in the world of the novel.
In a memory, a maid demands that Adriana quickly fix her messy appearance before returning to work.
Adriana recalls the night she accidentally witnessed Diego personally taking the life of Duke Berta.
Adriana turns to vanish into the rain, unaware that Estella has been watching her every move.
Estella watches the figure leave while wondering what the heroine's next move will be in this timeline.
A rustle sounds as Diego reviews a document identifying his children's tutor as a woman named Margaret. Javier reports that nothing but positive praise follows the 22-year-old governess since her arrival.
He notes that her calm temperament has won over both the children and the rest of the staff.
Diego sits at his desk while questioning how she originally came to find employment at the estate.
Javier explains that her family's financial ruin was accelerated by her father's habit of reckless gambling.
He adds that she remained at the mansion despite previously being dismissed from her position by the Duchess.
Diego's attention sharpens as the mention of a former fiancé catches his personal interest.
Javier identifies the man as a decent match from the family of Baron Erica, who was well-liked.
Diego dismisses the broken engagement as irrelevant, while Javier wonders why he is so concerned with her.
Javier is baffled that Diego would investigate her background so thoroughly for no apparent reason. Diego questions why a woman in financial trouble would refuse a wealthy fiancé's help to seek work instead. Javier explains she preferred employment to the marriage before asking if there is anything else to report. He playfully questions if Diego truly has no personal interest in the country girl's background.
Diego reflects on how her large glasses obscure most of her facial features from view.
A sliding sound echoes as Diego insists he views her strictly as a professional teacher for the children.
Javier asks why he ordered the investigation if he only cares about her teaching abilities. Diego watches Estela through the window, noting she saw his actions on the night of the murder.
Javier is stunned as Diego reveals the true reason he has taken such a sudden interest in her.
Diego commands Javier to summon the woman to his office to face him immediately.
Ripe apricots hang heavily from the branches of the orchard trees in the soft morning light.
Estela gathers the fruit while remembering how much the young lady enjoyed them during their last meeting.
She watches with hope, wishing that the sweet treat will help brighten the young girl's day. Javier approaches Estela as she finishes her work in the garden to deliver a message.
A metallic clink sounds as Estela asks what important message the man has brought for her.
A sharp gasp sounds as Javier announces that the young master has summoned her to his presence.
A tight squeeze sounds as Estela realizes this fateful confrontation is happening much sooner than she expected.
Estela asks for directions as Javier prepares to guide her toward the meeting with the new duke. Javier warns her not to provoke His Excellency to avoid any more unnecessary sacrifices within the family. A sudden flinch sounds as Estela asks if the duke's death was considered one of those sacrifices. Javier asks if she understands the horror of living with a family that will kill to survive.
A quick gasp sounds as Javier recounts the betrayal and deception faced by Diego's late mother, Dolores.
He remembers how young Diego often wept for his mother after her tragic and untimely passing.
Javier describes the brutal beatings the young boy endured simply for showing his natural grief.
He reflects on 20 years of abuse that were more than enough to break a person's spirit.
Javier admits he shares the guilt for the duke's death because he never stepped in to intervene. He maintains that there is no noble cause in targeting the innocent children who are left behind. A soft nod sounds as Javier realizes Estela's true goal is protecting the safety of the children.
He leads her forward, ready to assist her in her mission to save the young master and miss.
Diego's clasped hands signal he is prepared to offer his full support.
He addresses Estela as Miss Margaret while they meet in his dimly lit office.
A metallic click sounds as Estela enters the room and is formally welcomed by the new duke.
Diego explains that he has summoned the tutor because there is an important matter they need to discuss.
A rhythmic tap sounds as Diego asks what exactly she hopes to gain from him.
He lists the burdens of her life, including her gambling father, her siblings, and her depressed mother.
Diego calls her life tragic as Estela silently clutches her book to her chest.
He questions if her ultimate goal is to become the next Duchess.
Estela is completely baffled by his sudden mention of marriage and the Duchess position.
Diego invites her to speak, asking how he should save her from her current tragic life.
Estela internally mocks Diego's single-minded focus on marriage and power.
Adjusting her glasses, Estela states that there is indeed something she wants from him.
A sharp snap sounds as Diego waits intently for her to reveal her true motives.
Estela leans over the desk and demands that he spare the lives of Cedric and Cecilia.
Diego is left in stunned silence by her unexpected and selfless request.
Morning sunlight filters through the windows of a grand, quiet bedroom.
Diego wakes up in a cold sweat, clutching his head in visible distress.
A sudden wah sounds as he sits up, startled from his sleep.
Diego realizes he has just experienced a nightmare about the previous confrontation.
A soft pat sounds as Cecilia suddenly reaches out and calls for Diego.
A quick grab sounds as the young girl clutches his leg.
Diego asks who let her in, and Cecilia explains she came because the staff told her he was busy.
A tired sigh sounds as Diego scolds her for waking him after he pulled an all-nighter.
Cecilia innocently asks why he is still sleeping and warns that he will get in trouble for it.
A sharp poke sounds as Diego taps the girl's forehead, causing her to yelp in pain.
A quick swish sounds as Diego tries to shoo the child away while she clings to his bed.
A rhythmic thud sounds as Cecilia demands that Diego get up immediately.
A sharp rip sounds as the girl pulls on the blankets and stumbles backward with a gasp.
Cecilia begins to tear up, her lip trembling as she stares at her brother.
A soft sniffle sounds as Diego stares back with mounting annoyance.
Cecilia accuses him of breaking his promise to give her a gift if she brought him flowers.
Diego stares blankly, trying to recall the mentioned deal.
He remembers a past outdoor lesson where he jokingly promised a reward for their work. A weary groan sounds as Diego finally gives in and asks what she wants.
Diego repeats his question while Cecilia stares at him in stunned silence.
A soft hiccup sounds as the girl's eyes well up with tears once again. A loud wah sounds, echoing through the halls of the mansion. A sharp wail sounds as Cecilia cries loudly, leaving Diego completely overwhelmed and frustrated.
Diego covers his ears and desperately wonders where the girl's mother or tutor is.
The scene shifts back to the library where sunlight streams through the tall windows.
Estella stands in the classroom, looking prepared and professional.
Cedric glares at her and demands to know why she is still at the estate.
A sudden gasp sounds as Cedric claims she was supposed to have been fired.
A soft hum sounds as Estella reflects on her past emotional outburst with embarrassment.
A sharp thud sounds as Estella asks if the boy is curious about when she will leave.
She gleefully declares she won't leave until he has memorized every formula in existence.
A rhythmic tap sounds as she points out that his error rate is higher than usual today.
Cedric huffs in frustration while Estella watches him with a satisfied smile.
Estella reflects on the 10 days that have passed since the Duke's death.
She notes that her deal with Diego secured her job and a long future with the children. Cedric studies while Estella watches closely.
A parent's death goes unmourned. Rain falls on Verdesquines.
Estella feels secure beside her ally. Estella declares the exam over while Cedric begs for more time, though she insists time management is a necessary skill.
Diego accepts her firm time on it.
Diego interrupts the lesson unexpectedly. Diego holds a struggling tiny Cecilia. Diego stands tall despite the chaos.
Cecilia tries to escape Diego's grasp.
Diego's exhaustion is clear and visible. Estella questions how long he has been there, and Diego admits he watched from the moment she looked outside.
Diego requests a private conversation while Estella asks him to wait in the next room until she finishes cleaning.
Diego passes the girl to Estella. Diego grants them 5 more minutes.
Diego walks off with heavy steps.
Estella prepares for a long discussion. Cedric makes a bold playtime demand.
Estella threatens a difficult exam retake. Diego approves of their strange greeting.
Cedric asks about the country of origin for the greeting, while Estella explains it is foreign and helps them practice.
Diego reflects on his new title. Diego notes that she is early for their talk, while Estella reports that the young master is studying independently.
Diego insists on a brief talk.
Diego offers Estella a seat nearby.
Estella searches for a suitable chair. Tension rises between the two allies.
Diego demands they talk business immediately.
Diego claims he can distinguish who is on his side and addresses her as Miss Margaret. Diego notes they could have been partners, causing Estella to question why he is speaking in the past tense.
Diego expresses his disappointment that her student entered his bedroom this morning, ruining his rating of her. Diego realizes he left the young lady alone, while Estella points out that the girl is deeply afraid of her brother.
Diego decides to start their pact by discussing the specific duration of the contract period. Diego questions her conscience for asking him to protect children for life, while Estella notes his rising anger.
The contract specifies Cecilia's upcoming adulthood.
Diego pauses, considering her bold request.
Diego argues a tutor job cannot last that long, but Estella clarifies she only refers to the girl's stay in the mansion.
Estella swears to keep his secret.
Diego agrees to her terms and declares that the children will move their residence to the estate's annex.
Diego notes his inability to sleep and promises to assign a servant to her, prompting Estella to call it unfair.
Diego demands she repeat her claim.
Estella asks if he knows why she truly came to seek him out.
Estella explains she came because she believed he would be a more capable parent than the late Duchess. Estella reminds him she had a choice and could have begged the Duchess to spare their lives instead.
Diego questions why sending them to the annex is an issue if he is ensuring their survival as requested.
Estella stands to ask how children can grow up well when isolated and treated poorly by the surrounding adults. Estella recognizes how power changes perception.
Servants glare at the vulnerable children.
Diego doubts his own parenting abilities.
Diego admits he is feared by all.
Estella reflects on the cycle of abuse.
Diego requests that she speak freely.
Estella accuses Duchess Berta of systematic child abuse while a heavy thud sounds against the floor.
She highlights Cecilia's suffering and Cedric's plight.
Diego pauses his writing in stunned silence.
He realizes he misunderstood Cedric's true experience.
A flashback reveals Cedric's isolation during dither. Estella explains Duchess Berta's biased biological motivations.
She offers her testimony and suggests seeking witnesses. Diego contemplates the Duchess's fragile social standing. He notes her power depends on maternal rights. Diego understands and cancels the isolation plan as a scratch sounds from his pen.
Estella sighs in relief and expresses gratitude.
A sharp rip sounds as Diego destroys a document and calls her name.
A sudden spring sounds as Diego stands.
A soft shimmer sounds as he grabs her hand.
Diego bluntly proposes marriage to the tutor.
Estella is completely baffled by his proposal.
She asks for clarification in total disbelief.
Estella immediately rejects the sudden marriage offer.
Diego insists his demand is non-negotiable. Diego smiles, confident in his price. He notes the difficulty of finding loyalty.
He believes her knowledge makes her perfect.
Estella suggests he find a better match.
Diego defines marriage as a strategic contact.
Estella remains firm in her refusal.
She demands to know his true reasoning.
Estella predicts his eventual love for Adriana.
Diego dismisses her prediction with absolute certainty. He reveals his vow to avoid his father's mistakes.
He promises absolute loyalty in their contract.
Diego makes a solemn, unwavering promise.
A soft gulp sounds as Estella wavers.
She recalls the novel's destined romantic path.
Estella worries about the children's future abandonment.
She doubts he can resist Adriana's arrival.
Estella recalls Adriana's tragic original backstory.
She warns him that fate is complicated.
Diego expresses his genuine luck in meeting her. A sudden flinch sounds as she wonders. Estella questions his capacity for human trust.
She wonders if his cruelty was intentional.
Estella begins to discuss the inevitable breakup.
Diego is confused by her strange metaphors.
A quick jump sounds as she leaves.
Diego insists his proposal makes perfect sense. Estella realizes she lacks the necessary catalyst.
She contemplates forcing a fated meeting.
Estella surprises Diego by suggesting they make a high-stakes bet.
Estella predicts a legendary beauty will appear in 3 months and asks to revisit the marriage proposal then.
Diego mocks her for sounding like a fortune teller while she insists her prophecy is absolute. Dinner begins with heavy tension as Diego realizes he failed to count the attendees correctly.
Estella breaks the silence by complimenting Cecilia on her beautiful dress.
Cecilia joyfully reveals that Diego fulfilled his promise by buying the dress for her.
Diego smugly claims he always honors his word, while Estella encourages him to eat.
Estella reflects on how effective it was to bring the children to the dining table.
A plate of exquisite pastries sits waiting to be enjoyed.
Estella graciously thanks her hosts and prepares to taste the food. Estella is momentarily stunned by the quality of the meal. She is overwhelmed by how delicious everything tastes.
Estella savors the perfect combination of the rich foie gras mousse and the crispy bread.
Diego tempts her with a life of daily luxury if she accepts his hand in marriage.
Estella is dazzled by the promise of a transformed life filled with comfort and firework-worthy excitement.
Estella suddenly snaps out of her daydream with a startled gasp. Estella claims she lacks the confidence to accept, while Diego asks what kind of certainty she requires. Cecilia interrupts with excitement, asking if they are actually getting married.
Diego asks if they want to be a real family, prompting Estella to frantically claim he is only joking.
Cedric looks down at his hands, appearing deep in thought. Cedric shyly admits that he was also planning on marrying Estella in the future.
Estella is completely blindsided and horrified by the young boy's confession.
Cedric explains he wants to marry her so she can take his tests and do his homework.
Estella realizes both brothers are pursuing her for purely selfish reasons, while Diego dismisses Cedric's claim. Diego uses an old proverb to assert his seniority over his younger brother.
Cedric suggests moving to the Fernando kingdom so he can be her second husband under their polygyny laws.
Diego tells the boy he is speaking nonsense and points out the impossibility of changing their citizenship.
Estella desperately tries to silence the absurd and inappropriate conversation.
Estella scolds Diego for his behavior, but he counters by asking if she prefers someone much younger.
Estella is left speechless by the sheer absurdity of the situation.
She angrily tells him to stop teasing her before others misunderstand their relationship.
Diego gazes at her intensely and repeats his marriage proposal with renewed seriousness.
Estella wonders why brothers would even bother fighting over a woman like this.
Estella fumes internally at the childish and shameless behavior of the two brothers.
She resolves to leave the estate as soon as the matter with the Duchess is resolved.
The grand mansion remains quiet as Cedric calls out to Estella.
Cedric stops her to ask for one final confirmation that she won't marry his brother.
Estella carries Cecilia and reassures the boy that she and Diego are not actually related.
Cedric looks away, seemingly unconvinced or troubled by her answer.
Estella emphasizes her point with absolute certainty, promising she won't marry him.
Estella asks why Cedric is being so grumpy when he used to admire his older brother.
Estella cheers the children up by suggesting they take a trip outside the mansion today.
She promises to take them to a highly recommended private dessert cafe.
Cedric finally gives in and agrees to go since Estella wants him to.
Estella tells them to get ready while she prepares a carriage for their departure.
Estella reflects on the exhausting nature of childcare while asking a maid to help her prepare.
A quick top sounds as Estella finishes getting ready to head out.
Estella suddenly freezes as her eyes widen in shock at a sight across the hall.
A rhythmic click sounds from the heels of a woman approaching in a tattered purple dress.
Estella watches in horror as the Duchess appears, looking weak and disheveled.
The Duchess seethes with unbridled rage, her face twisted in a menacing snarl.
A rhythmic click sounds as the Duchess's heels approach the horrified Estella.
A sudden, aggressive movement sees the Duchess seize Estella by the collar.
Estella lets out a pained gasp as she is roughly handled by the furious woman. The Duchess questions if Estella understands the reason behind this sudden confrontation. Looming over her, the Duchess demands to know what scheme Estella is concocting. A pained grunt sounds as the Duchess grabs Estella's hair and labels her a hidden snake. Estella hits the floor with a heavy thud after the Duchess roughly casts her aside. The Duchess expresses her feeling of betrayal, accusing Estella of backstabbing her.
The Duchess demands to know Estella's plan for getting close to Diego.
Estella realizes her preoccupation with Diego's proposal caused her to miss the Duchess's surveillance.
A soft gulp sounds as Estella recognizes she must stay sharp against this dangerous woman.
Estella stands her ground and asserts that both Diego and Cedric are masters of the household to her. Estella argues that the brothers' relationship is beyond her control, inciting the Duchess's mockery.
The Duchess silences Estella's attempt to defend herself with a sharp, dismissive command.
Estella asks if it is cruel to involve children in adult grievances, enraging the Duchess even further.
The Duchess is deeply offended by Estella's bold and defiant gaze.
The Duchess reaches for Estella once more, her movements quick and violent.
Estella cries out in pain as the Duchess strikes her with a heavy blow.
The Duchess vows to correct Estella's attitude today, refusing to let the tutor's words go unpunished. Estella desperately shouts for the children to lock their doors and stay hidden from the violence.
A loud bang sounds as the Duchess strikes Cedric's door and demands he face her.
A soft creak sounds as Cecilia ignores the warnings and opens her door, concerned for her teacher.
The young girl's eyes widen in shock as she witnesses the struggle in the hallway.
A sudden shout sounds as Cecilia cries out for her teacher in fear.
Estella's breath hitches as she realizes the child has seen the Duchess's cruelty.
Cecilia runs toward them despite Estella's warnings, screaming for the violence to stop.
Cecilia grabs her mother's arm, begging her to stop hurting the teacher.
The Duchess's face is obscured by shadow as she looks down at the young girl with contempt.
The Duchess berates Cecilia for failing to recognize her own mother and lashes out.
Estella gasps in horror as the Duchess prepares to strike the small child.
A quick rush sounds as Estella pulls Cecilia into a protective embrace.
A heavy thud sounds as Estella takes the full force of the Duchess's strike to shield the girl.
A soft cry sounds as Cecilia clings to her teacher while Estella winces in pained silence.
Estella reflects on the intense pain of the blow and the horrific cruelty of the abuse.
A soft sigh sounds as the Duchess looks down at them with pure arrogance and a cold smirk.
The Duchess mocks Estella for overstepping her role and acting like the children's mother. Estella's voice is firm as she commands the Duchess to never touch Cecilia again.
The Duchess is momentarily stunned by the tutor's unwavering resolve and defies her words.
A sudden shout sounds as the Duchess orders her servants to remove Estella from the mansion immediately.
A cold question sounds as Diego arrives and asks about the source of the commotion.
A rhythmic step sounds as Diego walks into the center of the conflict, his presence commanding.
Diego's eyes narrow as he assesses the tense and violent situation before him. Cecilia continues to cry in Estella's protective arms, her fear apparent.
Diego demands an explanation for the chaos while the Duchess tries to take control of the narrative. The Duchess points a finger, declaring Estella fired and ordering Diego to find a replacement. Diego flatly refuses the demand, prompting the Duchess to accuse them of plotting against her. Estella looks up as Diego reaches out to offer his support and protection. Diego pulls Estella and Cecilia close, declaring that the Duchess has targeted someone very important to him.
Popular manhwa titles are showcased on a digital platform. A hand rests on Estella's shoulder as she is asked about her feelings regarding the situation.
The Duchess scoffs at the tutor's status, claiming her stepson's tastes cannot be that poor.
Diego smiles broadly as he equates his own preferences with those of his late father.
The Duchess attempts to restrain her temper, fearing that further escalation could lead to her downfall.
Diego stands as a protective wall between the Duchess and the tutor holding the child.
Diego officially dismisses the tutor, aiming to clear any confusion about the estate's hierarchy.
The Duchess refuses to back down, asserting her authority as the manager of the household. The Duchess argues that as the mother, she has final approval over the children's governess.
The Duchess coldly demands that Cecilia return to her side immediately. The Duchess reaches out to seize the girl, her expression darkening with impatience.
Cecilia clings to Estella in terror as the Duchess seethes with growing frustration.
The Duchess grabs Cecilia's arm roughly, threatening to drag the girl away by force.
Diego's hand suddenly intervenes, blocking the Duchess's attempt to harm the child.
Estella focuses on comforting the trembling girl, assuring her that she is safe now.
A gentle shushing sounds as Estella pulls the child into a protective embrace on the floor.
A rhythmic step sounds as Diego declares the end of the Duchess's reliance on his father's status.
Diego's eyes narrow with cold determination as he confronts the woman who harmed the child. Diego stands his ground and delivers a final command for the Duchess to leave the room. The Duchess stands frozen in shock, her face pale as she processes Diego's blunt rejection.
A rhythmic click sounds as the Duchess is forced to retreat under the watchful eyes of the maids.
Estella remains on the floor, holding Cecilia tightly as the tension in the hallway finally breaks.
A soft sigh sounds as Estella applies a cold compress to her bruised cheek. Estella assures a concerned maid she is fine and asks her to watch over the young mistress.
Estella looks away with a somber expression, reflecting on the cruelty she just witnessed.
A soft step sounds as Diego approaches, noting the Duchess is famous for her violent temper.
Diego playfully questions Estella's bad vision, doubting her need for the glasses she wears.
Diego picks up the glasses, inspecting them with a curious and skeptical gaze. Diego suggests Estella remove her glasses if her eyesight isn't truly the problem.
Diego looks confused as Estella insists that her vision is genuinely poor. Estella stares back with a defiant and serious look, refusing to play along with his teasing.
A soft thud sounds as Diego sits, arguing her quick reflex to protect Cecilia proves her vision is fine.
Diego continues to press the issue, his eyes fixed on her face with renewed interest.
A sudden gasp sounds as Diego leans in close, mesmerized by the intense blue of her eyes.
Diego finds it strange that he never noticed the striking color of her eyes until this moment.
A quick slide sounds as Estella reaches to put her glasses back on, clearly uncomfortable. Diego insists that the way her eyes shine is different when the glasses are removed. Diego asks if she is hiding something, prompting Estella to ask if he suspects her of a crime.
Estella adjusts her frames and prepares to speak her mind with absolute honesty.
Estella demands that the Duchess be placed under house arrest for the safety of the children.
A light laugh sounds as Diego listens to Estella argue that the violence will traumatize the siblings. A sudden bang sounds as Estella bursts into Cedric's room to check on the young boy.
A soft whimper sounds as Estella finds Cedric huddled in fear and pulls him into her arms. Cedric weeps, expressing his deep guilt for hiding while Estella and his sister faced their mother. A soft sob sounds as Cedric repeatedly apologizes to the tutor for his perceived cowardice.
Estella remains silent, her heart breaking for the boy who has suffered under his mother's shadow. Estella turns back to Diego and repeats the necessity of separating the children from the Duchess. Estella insists with absolute conviction that the separation is mandatory for their well-being.
Diego questions why Estella is taking personal responsibility when she gains nothing from it.
Estella explains the concept of mandated reporting, arguing that teachers have a moral duty to act.
Estella asks if they are from the same country, but Diego notes regional differences.
Estella asserts that ignoring abuse is just as wrong.
Estella reflects on her inability to abandon the children's tragic destiny.
Estella ponders if her purpose in this novel is to save the children.
The tutor and Diego sit together in quiet reflection.
Diego asks if she would have cared for him as a child.
Estella gently reaches out to touch the man's face.
Estella's eyes widen in surprise at her own actions.
Estella cups Diego's cheek as he watches her intently. Estella's hand remains softly against the man's face. A realization dawns that her feelings remain unchanged.
Diego stares at her with a stunned expression.
Estella blushes, wondering if she has overstepped.
A soft thump sounds as Diego smiles, finding comfort in her gentle touch and words.
Diego recalls when she asked about his late mother. Diego clarifies that his mother was nothing like the Duchess. Estella looks relieved to hear about his mother.
Diego describes his mother as a woman of immense resilience.
Diego recalls how his mother endured humiliation without showing her pain.
A sob sounds as young Diego cries over his mother's injury.
Dolores smiles warmly, hiding her pain to comfort her son. Estella reflects on how society unfairly judged Dolores by her appearance.
Estella realizes her own previous judgments were no different.
Harsh words and broken images represent the scorned Dolores face. Diego admits his resentment toward his father grew because of his mother and doubts her death was simple.
Estella asks why he is sharing such a personal secret.
Diego clenches his fist, noting her attempt to appear noble.
Diego stands, surrounded by flowers, as he acknowledges her character.
Estella looks up at him with a thoughtful gaze.
Diego breaks the original story by exiling the Duchess alone.
Estella watches from the window as the household shifts.
Diego reviews records to find the tutors the Duchess mistreated. Estella reflects on the difficulty of bringing back the former governesses. Estella swoons over Diego's wealth, looks, and dramatic personality.
Diego looks charming as Estella admires his soft features.
A soft sigh sounds as Estella focuses on his handsome appearance.
Wah! Estella jumps in surprise as Cecilia peeks from around a corner. Cecilia explains she just arrived to find her teacher. Estella is relieved she didn't voice her embarrassing pots.
Estella suggests they go find Cedric for their outing.
Cecilia is overjoyed at the prospect of a trip.
A rhythmic step sounds as Cecilia excitedly mentions her love for sweets.
A quick knock sounds at the young master's door.
Cedric calls out for them to wait just one moment.
A sudden bang sounds as Cedric bursts out of his room, declaring he is ready. The maids note how eagerly the boy waited for them.
A maid whispers a warning about giving the boy too many sweets.
A sharp gasp sounds as one maid silences the other for gossiping about the family. The maids wish them a safe and enjoyable journey.
Cedric stubbornly refuses help as they board the carriage.
Estella looks contemplative as the carriage begins to move.
Squeezed between the two children, Estella asks why they are sitting next to her when the opposite seat is empty. The children refuse to move, and Estella decides they should just proceed with their trip as they are. Estella looks out the window, wondering why the estate gate hasn't opened yet. A rhythmic step sounds as a crowd gathers near the gate, where a woman in a cloak is waiting.
Wah! Estella calls out to a brown-haired knight, asking if something has gone wrong.
The knight apologizes and asks for patience, prompting Estella to ask if there is a problem with the gate.
The knight explains that a visitor is insisting on seeing the young duke regardless of the current situation.
A rhythmic click sounds as Estella steps out of the carriage and asks to meet the visitor directly.
Estella wonders if the person visiting Diego could be the heroine of the story.
A silver-haired woman in a purple cloak is introduced as Lady Adriana. Adriana looks on with a calm and serious expression as she waits outside.
Adriana stands surrounded by roses as the narrative highlights her striking presence.
Estella approaches the gate and confirms the woman's identity, leading Adriana to ask how she is known. Estella explains she remembered the woman's beauty from the funeral, surprising Adriana.
Estella notes that Adriana would have been admitted sooner if she had identified herself earlier.
Estella has a sudden, sharp realization that changes her perspective on the meeting.
A comical look of panic crosses Estella's face, while Adriana remains confused by her reaction.
Estella reflects on this being an opportunity to prove a beauty exists who can capture Diego's interest.
Estella turns to the knight and firmly requests that he open the gate immediately.
Estella claims there was a mix-up and that she was already expecting a guest for the young duke.
Wah! The gate swings open as Adriana processes the sudden change in her fortune.
Estella leans in to whisper a request for the knight to keep their conversation a secret.
Estella explains that secret meetings between young people are necessary to avoid misunderstandings.
A rhythmic step sounds as the knight retreats, leaving the two women together.
Adriana thanks her helper and asks for the identity of the woman who assisted her.
Estella introduces herself as the household tutor, making Adriana realize the children are still present.
Estella reflects on Adriana witnessing the duke's murder and the children's narrow escape from death.
Estella clasps her hands together, feeling the weight of the secrets she carries.
Estella invites Adriana to the drawing room, noting that Diego will return to the estate soon.
Estella asks the silver-haired woman for her name so she can remember her kindness.
The tutor introduces herself using the name Estella Margaret.
A loud command sounds for everyone to step aside as a new carriage approaches.
A rhythmic click sounds as Diego's carriage arrives at the gate, halting the group.
A soft sigh sounds as Diego watches from the window, worried about a certain secret being discovered.
A rhythmic step sounds as Diego approaches and notes that it is a surprise to meet Estella there.
Diego asks if she was waiting to greet him, but Estella clarifies they were heading into town.
Diego repeats her words with a look of serious contemplation and suspicion. Diego questions if she intended to leave without permission, while Estella doubts she needs it.
Diego argues that outings must be reported to the guardian, though Estella views him as the primary danger.
Estella explains the simple plan for the children to visit a boutique for cake.
A rhythmic top sounds as Diego dismisses the children's needs and asserts his authority as their guardian.
The knight interrupts the tense conversation to inform Diego that a guest is waiting for him.
A soft gasp sounds as Diego turns his attention toward the silver-haired woman standing nearby.
Adriana steps forward and politely introduces herself to the young duke.
A sudden crack sounds as the atmosphere turns cold when Diego denies knowing her and questions her entry.
Estella clenches her jaw, determined to ensure the two protagonists finally meet.
Estella views this as her chance to escape Diego's control while the knight panics over the fake appointment.
Diego demands a full explanation for the visitor's presence from his tutor.
Diego's eyes narrow as he flatly states he has no memory of any scheduled meeting with the woman.
Estella raises 3 fingers as she reminds Diego of their 3-month promise.
Estella reflects on her prediction that a legendary beauty would appear to challenge his marriage terms.
Diego watches the tutor with a calculating and suspicious gaze. Diego observes the silver-haired woman and identifies her as the beauty meant to appear before him.
Diego decides to play along with the situation to avoid further complications.
Diego apologizes for his forgetfulness and asks for her name, leading Adriana to introduce herself and mention her poor health.
Diego suggests they move inside the mansion to discuss the details further. A rhythmic step sounds as the Duke and the visitor walk away while the tutor watches.
Estella is relieved that despite the recent crisis, the original story's path seems restored.
Diego coldly dismisses the matter and says he will see to it.
Diego curtly orders Estella to stay back as he leaves the gate.
A foreboding energy follows the man as he walks away without another word. Estella is left confused by his departure while the children loudly complain about the wait.
Estella is shaken by the man's frightening words while the silver-haired boy urges her to leave.
A rhythmic clunk sounds as the carriage wheel begins to turn for their trip.
Squeezed in the carriage, Estella is shocked by the children's competitive appetite, while certain Diego will accept the proposal. A cheerful mascot appears with a friendly greeting and a reminder to enjoy the series.
A soft breathing sound occurs as the young master sleeps peacefully in his bed.
A sudden click sounds as Estella cautiously opens a large set of ornate doors.
A nervous gulp sounds as the tutor peers into the darkened room. Estella moves stealthily through the mansion's halls and staircases to avoid being seen.
Estella hopes she can reach the safety of her room without being caught.
Estella is glad she hasn't encountered Diego and feels her plan to return at sunset was successful.
A sharp click sounds as Estella closes her door and sighs in relief at finishing the day safely.
Diego startles her by questioning her safety, prompting a loud scream of shock from the tutor.
Estella protests that he scared her, but Diego notes his own eardrums were more startled.
Diego explains he spoke first to prevent her from being even more surprised by his presence. Diego claims his actions were his personal way of being considerate toward her. Estella argues that a man shouldn't enter a lady's room in such a manner. Estella insists that even the young Duke should be aware of proper etiquette.
Diego asks if standing him up was polite and says he will remember the behavior.
Estella asks when she stood him up, but Diego points out she should have returned early for their talk.
Estella explains she assumed he was busy with the young noblewoman who arrived earlier. Estella shifts the focus to demand what he was doing looking at her desk.
Estella defensively declares that she doesn't even keep a personal diary.
Estella is relieved he didn't find her hidden romance novel, though she admits to being curious about them.
A soft sigh sounds as Diego asks what she specifically wanted to say to him.
Diego stands over her and states he has several questions of his own to ask.
A sharp tap sounds as Diego crosses his arms and asks for the identity of the woman.
Estella reminds him she was introduced as Adriana and asks if they were previously acquainted.
Estella says she remembered her beauty from the funeral and feels as though she is being interrogated.
A sudden bang sounds as Diego slams the table and asks why she brought the woman inside.
A sharp tap sounds as Estella explains her logic from a defendant's stand, noting the woman's earnest speech.
A rhythmic top sounds as Diego sits at the prosecutor's stand and asks about her promise to him.
Estella admits she lied about the promise to the gatekeeper as a temporary solution to the situation. A soft sigh sounds as Diego notes something interesting happened, and Estella asks for details.
Diego reveals with a serious expression that the young lady proposed marriage to him.
Diego explains Adriana claimed to know he killed his father and offered silence in exchange for marriage. Estella realizes that from Diego's perspective, it looks like she conspired with the visitor. Estella tells herself to remain calm and asks if the woman mentioned her name specifically. Diego explains the visitor denied having any connection to him, while Estella admits she only saw the woman from a distance at the funeral. Diego prepares to ask a final question, leaving the tutor feeling confused and nervous. Diego bluntly asks if he should proceed with the marriage or not, catching the tutor completely off guard. Estella's blue eyes widen in shock behind her round spectacles as she processes the question. The tutor wonders why the young Duke would ask for her opinion on such a significant life decision.
Diego tells her to go ahead and answer, as she will be his lifelong partner, prompting Estella to ask for clarification.
A loud gong sounds as Estella is horrified by the thought of sharing a life and a bed with someone who once threatened her.
She questions if the original story's character was always capable of saying such reasonable things. Estella notes the woman's beauty, but Diego dismisses the suggestion with a firm X sign and a blunt refusal. Estella suggests his heart must have been pounding, but Diego holds up 2 X signs to repeatedly deny it. Diego tosses the signs aside and states that he remembers her name is Miss Margaret. Diego places his hands on Estella's shoulders and explains he came here because he wanted to trust her.
He admits that if he were his old self, he would have kicked her out the moment he had any doubts. Diego suggests she stop reading the romance novels hidden under her drawer that focus on love and affairs.
Chibi Estella realizes her secret stash of adult novels has been discovered as symbols of embarrassment surround her. A loud scream sounds as the tutor reacts with intense embarrassment at being caught.
Estella yells at him for snooping through her things, but Diego argues that a minimal search was necessary.
A loud click sounds as Diego's hand grasps a handle to exit the room. Diego turns back and commands her to ensure he can trust her, no matter what happens in the future.
A soft thud sounds as Estella clutches a book, looking dazed and overwhelmed by the interaction.
She hides her blushing face behind the book and stammers to herself in a moment of distress.
Estella adjusts her glasses and firmly declares that she will not trust him despite his request.
A rhythmic tap sounds as someone's shoe steps across the floor of the mansion.
Diego enters a room where a man welcomes him back after his long absence. The older man is identified as Viscount Beautry, Diego's maternal uncle, who notes he didn't see Diego at the funeral.
A rhythmic tap sounds as the Viscount continues his observation about Diego's absence from the family gathering.
Diego sits across from his uncle and explains he wasn't feeling well at the time of the funeral.
Diego reflects on Estella's information that his uncle is a trader who lost his fortune to gambling. Several gold coins fall and bounce across a hard surface as the narrative shifts to the uncle's debts.
A rhythmic crack sounds as Diego's inner thoughts reveal his uncle's involvement with drugs.
The uncle claims he was a respectable man who is now in a pitiful state, then transitions to a specific request.
The uncle brings up rumors that Diego evicted the Duchess from the annex, showing a scene of her in chains.
The older man warns that harsh treatment of a widow looks bad, but Diego asks if he knows why she was locked up.
Diego remains silent and composed as he listens to his uncle's attempt to lecture him.
A narrative box explains that Cecilia once stepped in to stop her mother from hitting the governess.
A rhythmic tap sounds as the uncle expresses shock that a child would dare hit her mother, calling it outrageous.
Diego reflects on the injustice of norms that forbid a child's defiance while labeling parental punishment as discipline.
A sharp exclamation sounds as Diego calls out to his uncle to get his attention. Diego asks whether the punch of a child or the kick of an adult would have caused more pain.
The uncle stammers and questions why the girl had to intervene in the conflict at that moment.
A rhythmic crack sounds as a flashback shows the Duchess violently grabbing the governess's hair. Diego explains he couldn't stand the abuse any longer and chose to isolate the Duchess from the children.
The uncle claims to understand Diego's feelings regarding his siblings' misery and falls silent.
Diego leans forward and asks his uncle if he has truly grown attached to the children. Diego reflects that the children obstruct his path, a fact his uncle would never be able to understand.
Diego recalls the Duchess spreading rumors at court about her son's brilliance and the Duke's death.
He concludes that these rumors are likely the reason his succession process has been delayed.
Diego stares with a piercing gaze, noting that without Estella's warnings, he might have believed his uncle's advice.
Diego reflects on the uncle's secret collusion with the parents to obtain payments for their medicine.
The uncle warns Diego to be careful, claiming the children will eventually become his enemies.
Diego reflects on the weight of bloodlines and the meaning of family while sitting with his uncle.
The young Duke asks his uncle for agreement while the Viscount clears his throat nervously. A narrative bubble observes that the older man is not easily influenced by others.
The Viscount laughs and reassures Diego that he would never act against his own nephew.
A quick top sounds as Diego places a small wooden chest on the table between them.
The uncle stares at the wealth as Diego mentions hearing about his financial struggles.
Diego notes that he has been filled with regret since his father passed away.
A nervous gulp sounds as the Viscount wishes he had treated the Duke better in life.
Diego's smirk reveals his inner thoughts about the Duchess's impending financial ruin.
He reflects that her interest payments will soon drain all of her remaining assets.
Diego thinks of his father's body and decides her addiction will hasten her own demise. The uncle reaches for the chest as Diego claims he only feels sorrow for his father.
Diego asks if he should depart soon while the Viscount stammers in surprise.
A firm clutch sounds as Diego places a hand on the Viscount's shoulder and offers support.
Diego tells himself he should care for his uncle, who has become like a father.
A collage shows Diego smiling as he advises his uncle to enjoy himself but stay healthy.
A soft scribbling sound occurs as narrative boxes describe Adriana's tragic life history.
The tutor watches carefully as she reflects on the white-haired noblewoman's difficult past.
Narrative text explains that the Marquis cherished his lawful wife, Adriana's biological mother.
A flashback shows the Marquis proposing with flowers to the pink-haired Marquishioness.
The sound of rain falls as a dark shadow descends upon the once happy household. A baby cries as the Marchioness passes away during the birth of her daughter.
The Marquise hated Adriana and eventually abandoned her for causing her mother's death.
Remarriage led to the irreparable breakdown of the relationship between father and daughter. Adriana became a victim of constant mistreatment despite being the family's rightful heir. A rhythmic top sounds as the narrative notes a new challenge arrived when she grew up.
A soft scribbling sound occurs as Adriana reviews a marriage proposal from King Granton III.
The elderly king already has 8 wives, making his 9th marriage offer unappealing.
The tutor thinks that even Diego would flee from such a grim marriage prospect.
In the original story, the protagonists developed mutual sympathy and fell in love.
A book cover represents the original plot of the contract marriage story. A rhythmic top sounds as Estella decides to review the original novel's events.
A sharp creak sounds as the butler enters and addresses the tutor as Miss Margaret.
The butler presents a tray containing a new letter that has arrived for her.
A soft rustle sounds as Estella takes the unexpected envelope and wonders who sent it.
The tutor's eyes widen as she processes the arrival of the mysterious message.
Estella questions why such a letter would arrive at this specific time.
A mascot appears with a greeting as the tutor expresses her surprise at receiving any mail. A narrative bubble emphasizes her confusion regarding the timing of the letter.
A soft rustle sounds as the governess wonders if Lady Adriana is the sender.
The scene shifts to Adriana sitting at her desk and writing a letter.
A soft scribbling sound occurs as Adriana writes a message to express her gratitude.
A soft rustle sounds as Estella reads the noblewoman's request for a private meeting.
Adriana invites the tutor to meet her at the opera house later that evening.
Estella tells the butler that the location for the meeting is quite unexpected. A sudden start sounds as the butler informs the tutor that Diego is calling for her.
Estella realizes with a worried look that the Duke has already heard about the letter.
Chibi Estella sighs while the butler reacts with a confused expression.
A narrative bubble asks where she should go next in this complicated situation.
Diego stands in an indoor shooting range and aims his long rifle at a target.
A sharp bang sounds as a shot is fired.
A whistling sound trails off as the bullet hits the bullseye.
A soft exhale escapes Diego as he lowers his rifle.
Rhythmic clapping sounds as Diego stands with a stoic expression.
Estella approaches and remarks that the shot was a direct hit. Diego walks over and asks if she was watching his practice, and she admits it was interesting.
A soft click sounds as Diego notes the rifle is a rare item even in the capital.
Diego asks if she wants to hear more about it, but Estella rejects the offer and the concept of weapon development.
Diego looks dejected while Estella questions why he assumes someone would be secretly killed.
Diego explains that the weapon is difficult to use in rain or wind, making improvements necessary for war.
A swift whoosh sounds as Diego slings the rifle over his shoulder.
Estella watches him walk away as a breeze blows leaves around her.
Diego stops and looks back with a firm and piercing gaze.
Estella's eyes narrow with a serious look behind her glasses.
A soft cough sounds as Estella mentions she heard he had called her.
Diego asks if she knows her companion for the outing she has planned.
GB Estella recalls the blackmailer's marriage demand as Diego finds the situation strange.
A short huff sounds as Estella asks if she must report everything to the Duke.
Diego demands to know her destination before giving permission, leaving Estella feeling frustrated.
A shimmering light follows the comment that his human curiosity is quite disappointing.
Estella stands among flowers and reacts with shock to his blunt statements.
A soft sigh sounds as the two stand in silence amidst the blossoms.
Diego asks what kind of date course that is after Estella reveals she received opera tickets from Lady Adriana.
A soft hum sounds as Estella notes she has never received such a polite invitation.
Diego questions if she is leaving his side, but she argues it is not a matter of picking sides.
Diego looks bothered as Estella suggests he tell Adriana that she will marry him instead.
A soft cough sounds as Estella questions what he meant regarding Lady Adriana.
A low groan sounds as Diego clarifies he is referring specifically to the marriage proposal. Diego insists his proposal makes other marriages illogical, while Estella views his stance as an outright rejection. Estella reflects on her lack of right to interfere in the matters between Adriana and Diego.
She acknowledges that Adriana's misfortune is tied to her and that the lady deserves to reclaim her future.
Estella thinks of the difficulty of explaining her past life and the novel that complicates her reality.
A firm squeeze sounds as Estella clutches her dress and addresses the Duke.
Estella declares she will only marry for love and bluntly tells Diego he is not her type.
Diego stands speechless as Estella reflects that her perspective might be difficult for others to understand.
Diego reveals his utter shock, noting that he has never been rejected by a woman before.
Chibi Estella observes that he looks much more flustered than she had anticipated. A soft click sounds as Estella's dark desire switch flips while viewing the handsome man's unpleasant face.
A rhythmic tremble sounds as Diego's frustration grows while Estella laughs to herself. Estella gleefully mentions her desire to make a handsome man cry at least once in her life.
Diego questions her first-time claim while she recalls an older man from her hometown.
A firm grip sounds as Estella mentions a gluttonous man who once ate her food.
Estella explains her bad luck with men and why she chose to stay single for years.
A soft whoosh sounds as Estella turns away and continues her chatter.
A soft gasp sounds as Estella's eyes widen with a cheerful look.
Diego's footsteps sound as he brings up the gluttonous man she mentioned.
Rhythmic steps sound as he questions her interaction with the man 16 years her senior. A loud sigh sounds as Diego asks why he was the only one among them that she rejected.
A mascot appears as the line about dating a gluttonous man is repeated.
Rhythmic steps sound as the discussion of her past suitors continues. A quick rhythmic top sounds as the carriage rolls along the road.
It pulls up outside a grand multi-story opera house.
Margaret thinks the Duke let her go more easily than expected.
She wonders if her blunt rejection was truly that shocking to him.
Margaret reflects on how easily he released her after demanding she report back.
Margaret arrives at her seat and hears a voice calling her nearby. Adriana peeks from behind a partition and beckons Margaret to join her. Margaret apologizes for being late, but Adriana is just glad she came.
Margaret expresses her gratitude for the invitation to such a wonderful occasion.
Adriana apologizes for the secret meeting, explaining she couldn't let anyone know.
She chose a secluded box used by couples to remain unnoticed by others.
A sudden tap sounds as Adriana enthusiastically agrees it feels very private.
Rhythmic clapping sounds as the performance begins and Margaret watches.
A woman sings on stage, her voice filling the large opera hall.
A sudden shout sounds from the stage, startling the attentive tutor. Adriana confesses she felt desperate enough today to take a huge gamble.
A firm squeeze sounds as Adriana asks if she knows about the proposal.
Adriana reveals she is about to be married, a common noble misfortune.
A stage scene mirrors Adriana's fear of the king's reputation for violence.
She identifies her suitor as the 60-year-old King Granton III.
A sharp clench sounds as Adriana notes her father chooses her husband.
She admits she desperately needed someone who could protect her.
Adriana wonders if mistreatment in a foreign country would be even worse.
Adriana admits spending her meager funds as a marquise's daughter on tickets. A singer on stage reflects Adriana's feeling of being a poor nobody.
Adriana emphasizes that she is currently in a truly desperate situation.
A sudden grab sounds as Adriana reaches out and pleads with Margaret.
She begs Margaret to create an opportunity for her to meet the young Duke.
Margaret reflects that Adriana is being sincere rather than using status. Adriana's status is impressive, yet her family name alone intimidates many. Margaret notes that Adriana is righteous and is making a sincere request.
A nervous gulp sounds as Margaret considers the weight of the request. Adriana looks hopeful as Margaret admits she cannot be certain but will try. Margaret stands and firmly declares she will do her absolute best. A soft cry sounds as Adriana tearfully thanks Margaret for her help. Adriana sits in a moment of quiet, sorrowful reflection.
She looks down and whispers her sincere appreciation for the support.
Margaret wonders to herself how she will ever change Diego's mind.
Loud clapping sounds as the performers bow at the end of the show.
Margaret sits in the box, asking fate if they have a chance.
Diego sits alone on his bed, reading a book in silence.
A soft rustle sounds as Diego turns a page, looking deep in thought. He recalls Margaret's declaration that she will only marry for love. A sharp huff sounds as she declares he is definitely not her type.
Chibi Diego's face crinkles with intense irritation at the memory.
A firm slam sounds as Diego closes his book in a fit of pique.
He sighs and notes that he cannot even rest despite everything ending.
His eye twitches with anger as he continues to dwell on her.
Diego looks back with a confused expression as a voice calls him.
The purple-haired girl peeks out and asks if she looks pretty.
Diego is surprised to see the girl and reminds her their deal is over.
A soft shimmer sounds as the girl smiles, and a confused Diego wonders what she wants. A playful mascot appears as the scene takes a brief, lighthearted pause. The purple-haired girl bluntly asks Diego if he has feelings for her teacher.
A sudden sparkle sounds as her large, determined eye fills the view.
Diego covers his face and gives a flat, immediate rejection.
The girl stubbornly insists he does while he continues to deny her claims.
Diego is exasperated as the girl questions why he proposed if there is no affection.
A soft hum sounds as the girl ponders the strange logic of marriage.
Diego dismisses her confusion, calling it a complex matter only for adults.
Diego clarifies that his proposal was born of necessity rather than personal preference.
A soft whoosh sounds as Diego critiques Margaret's features, starting with her eyelashes.
He argues that thick, dense eyelashes would only cause discomfort and pain.
Diego mentally dismisses the value of having beautiful features on functional organs like the nose and lips.
A sharp smack sounds as Diego hits his forehead in sudden, self-inflicted frustration.
A soft hiss sounds as Diego realizes his lack of sleep is making him speak nonsense.
Diego tries to simplify things by stating the teacher is merely a useful person to him. The girl is shocked and accuses him of trying to use her beloved teacher.
A swift whoosh sounds as the girl threatens to warn the teacher about his tricks.
A soft rustle sounds as Diego attempts to handle the child's sudden outburst.
Diego falls into a quiet, contemplative silence for a moment.
A soft tap sounds as he prepares to flick the girl's forehead in annoyance.
Diego orders the girl to leave so he can finally get some rest. The girl stands stunned while Diego complains about his complete exhaustion. Rhythmic taps sound as the girl continues to pester Diego while he hides under the covers.
Diego asks what she wants, and she offers to help him with his problem. A small Diego icon asks exactly how she plans to provide assistance.
A small girl icon tells him to pay close attention to her works. The girl confidently claims that her influence in the situation is quite significant.
She explains her closeness to the teacher and offers to improve his reputation with her.
The girl celebrates her plan while Diego remains speechlessly skeptical.
Diego questions her true motives, doubting this is a simple act of goodwill.
Diego asks where she learned such words while she credits her teacher's lessons.
Rhythmic knocks sound as Javier the butler announces the arrival of a guest.
Diego checks the time while the curious girl looks on. Javier asks if the guest should wait, but Diego insists on seeing them immediately.
A soft rustle sounds as Javier opens the door and enters with a polite smile.
Javier notes the girl's presence as an awkward atmosphere fills the room.
A soft pat sounds as Diego places his hand on the girl's hat.
Diego advises Javier not to confuse children, and the butler politely agrees.
A soft chuckle sounds as Diego admits to making a mistake while Javier reacts with a sweat drop.
Diego asks how much longer the girl intends to follow him.
The girl excitedly declares she is coming along to meet the visitor.
A heavy sigh sounds as Diego leads the way to the meeting.
A soft exhale sounds as Diego composes himself for the coming interaction.
A firm squeeze sounds as the girl takes Diego's hand for support.
The girl giggles happily as they walk through the grand hallway.
The scene shifts to the elegant interior of the reception room.
A dark-haired man in a deep purple cloak waits silently for the Duke.
Diego enters the room with Cecilia as a quiet gasp sounds while his rhythmic steps echo.
Lionel teases Diego for becoming a babysitter and asks if he's training to be a husband, but Diego notes it's a fitting age for him to marry.
A sudden shout of shock sounds as Lionel reminds Diego they were supposed to say single forever. A sharp clench sounds as Diego points out the country needs an heir, leaving Chibi, Cecilia, and Lionel bewildered.
Lionel dismisses the concern, noting that his father is about to have another child anyway.
Diego asks the young girl to greet Lionel, who leans in with curiosity.
Lionel introduces himself as the prince, but Diego jokes that the nation's future looks bleak, leaving Cecilia puzzled by his title. Cecilia asks why Lionel is called a prince if he is just a tattletale, prompting an annoyed huff from the man. A sharp crack sounds as Lionel reacts with intense irritation to Cecilia calling him shabby.
A soft whoosh sounds as Lionel removes his hood to show his face, asking Cecilia if she still thinks he looks shabby.
A soft shimmer sounds as Cecilia is momentarily dazzled by his unexpectedly handsome appearance.
Cecilia wonders if he isn't a prince, but actually suffers from a prince complex.
A heavy thump sounds as Lionel's pride is crushed while Diego lets out a sharp huff of amusement. A soft chuckle sounds as Diego enjoys the scene, while Javier reacts with a nervous sweat drop. Crown Prince Lionel Eduardo laments the girl's lack of a filter and reiterates his desire to never have children.
Lionel worries if Cecilia will tell the Duchess about their meeting, but Diego assures him she is close to his birth mother and can be trusted.
Lionel is surprised to hear about the deep level of trust and closeness.
A soft sigh sounds as Diego claims she is too young to understand unless she were a firstborn child.
Cecilia is left pondering the meaning of the term firstborn.
Lionel asks if he is joking about such a serious matter. Diego looks away while Cecilia continues to focus on the mention of the firstborn. A sharp huff sounds as Diego dismisses the conversation as mere nonsense.
Diego tells Cecilia it is time for the adults to speak as a soft tap sounds on her shoulder.
Javier leads the girl away as she lets out a small groan of disappointment.
Cecilia waves goodbye, calling Lionel a prince with a prince complex, much to his annoyance.
A soft click sounds as Javier closes the door and Lionel mentions Diego's recent exploits with a heavy sigh.
Lionel congratulates Diego on finally getting rid of his stepmother, which Diego views as inevitable.
Lionel notes a new problem has arisen, and Diego asks if it's about his title.
Diego corrects him, clarifying that the current issue still involves his stepmother.
A soft sigh sounds as Diego insists she is not his mother, regardless of how Lionel views the situation.
Diego explains she was only a mistress to his father and they were never legally married.
Diego finds the entire situation with his family ties to be incredibly annoying. Diego notes that his stepmother and the Countess are very close, and their influence is preventing him from receiving his title. Lionel wonders what he can do, as his father is completely blinded by the woman's influence.
Diego insists Lionel handle the situation since he is suffering from the messes Lionel's family has caused.
Lionel muses that this is simply the benefit of being the prince's childhood playmate.
A soft smirk sounds as Diego looks at Lionel with a knowing and mischievous expression.
Diego recalls how he used to ignore Lionel as children and tells him to stop pretending they were ever that close. Diego offers to trade a secret about the Countess's weakness for a favor.
Lionel becomes curious about what this weakness could possibly be.
Diego says he will reveal the secret if Lionel promises to confront her on his behalf.
Lionel agrees to the deal, insisting there be no takebacks once the information is shared.
A soft gasp sounds as Diego reveals that the Countess is currently having an affair.
Lionel dismisses the news as old territory, but Diego clarifies that this particular affair is much more significant. Diego identifies the man as High Priest Delmar, shocking Lionel with the high-stakes revelation.
Lionel stands up in shock as Diego confirms the two have been meeting secretly for some time.
Lionel finds the new information incredibly interesting and potentially useful.
Lionel notes the deep hostility between Delmar and the king, mentioning Delmar's lost claim to the throne.
Diego adds that the two men share similar tastes in women, which has led to many fierce rivalries over the years.
Lionel wonders why forbidden relationships provoke such passion and asks if the woman leaked royal information to the priest, to which Diego responds that it requires investigation, but their secret meetings alone are enough to sow distrust.
A rhythmic tap sounds as Diego continues his line of thought.
A sharp crack sounds as Lionel reacts with explosive irritation to Diego's request for another favor.
Diego describes the task as relatively simple while tea is prepared.
Lionel looks on with a questioning gaze as Diego brings up the eldest daughter of a certain noble house.
Diego reveals he needs information on a woman named Adriana Astes.
A week before the royal ball, Margaret and Adriana share a private conversation.
Adriana explains her father's plan to introduce her to the king and begs Margaret to arrange a single meeting between her and the young duke on that day.
Margaret looks down with a troubled expression, contemplating the consequences.
Margaret asks what will happen if Adriana fails in her endeavor.
A soft sigh sounds as Adriana trails off, unable to answer the question.
Margaret lets out a sudden, desperate shout of no while clutching her head in distress. Margaret stands alone in her classroom, breathing heavily from the stress of the situation.
A soft groan sounds as Margaret hits her head, lamenting that after saving the children, the heroine is now being sold off because of her.
Margaret resolves that she must find a way to stop Adriana's marriage at the upcoming ball. Margaret wonders what to do as a dark, looming shadow approaches her from behind.
Diego asks if something is the matter, startling a wide-eyed Margaret.
Margaret continues to fret over her predicament, unaware of her surroundings.
Diego repeats his question about her well-being while Margaret reacts with shock. Diego looks down at the seated Margaret with a cold, piercing gaze.
Margaret remains speechless for a moment, letting out a small gasp. A heavy thump sounds as Margaret slumps, claiming she let out a groan without realizing it because of the mountain of lessons she has to teach.
A soft scrape sounds as Diego pulls up a chair, asking if the children are truly the only thing on her mind. A soft puffed sounds as Margaret asks what else there is to worry about, while Diego's mental icon finds it hilarious that she looks so ridiculous sitting on a tiny child's chair.
A soft sounds as Diego considers her response with a skeptical look. A soft flinch sounds as Diego asks Margaret if she enjoyed her recent outing. A soft hum sounds as Margaret says it was fine, prompting Diego to ask what she discussed with the other woman. A soft rustle sounds as Margaret fidgets with her dress, claiming they only talked about a play they watched together.
A soft pfft sounds as Diego asks if they watched the play about the clock tower, while a panicked Margaret realizes she must get Diego to attend the ball.
A soft smile sounds as Diego wonders if it was the play about the red shoes and suggests they cooperate for the time being.
A soft chuckle sounds as Margaret excitedly explains the play was a lovely story with a talented lead singer.
A sudden boom sounds as Diego mockingly asks if the play was anything like the adult books he found hidden in her drawer, leaving Margaret completely horrified.
Margaret accuses him of being crude, but Diego dismisses her, claiming he is only stating the facts.
Margaret reflects on the fact that the male protagonists in her books were often described with that same nickname.
A soft whoosh sounds as Diego leans in close, suggesting that since women find their ideal types in stories, he must fit her taste perfectly.
A soft sounds as Diego smiles confidently and asks if he is wrong about her feelings.
Margaret stares at him with a flat, deadpan expression and tells him he is definitely wrong. Margaret laughs nervously, admitting she can't actually say that before pivoting to praise the gentlemanly behavior of the play's male lead.
Margaret casually mentions that she heard the lady is busy preparing for the royal ball next week.
Margaret continues the conversation, noting how much effort the woman is putting into her attendance.
A sharp crack sounds as a tiny Diego icon dismissively acknowledges the information.
A soft whoosh sounds as Margaret asks if the young duke plans to attend, but he gives an immediate and flat refusal.
A soft rustle sounds as Diego notes he has no partner to go with, though he mentions he is forced to attend due to a promise made to Lionel. Margaret questions why a partner is necessary for a simple social gathering, prompting Diego to ask why she is suddenly so interested in his social life.
A soft huff sounds as Margaret adjusted her glasses, insisting she is only concerned because he is her employer.
Diego leans down toward her, challenging her to just admit that she is deeply interested in him.
Diego suggests that her claims might be more believable if she were more honest about her feelings.
A soft gasp sounds as Margaret struggles to find the right words to respond.
A soft gasp sounds as Margaret begins to speak, and a teasing Diego cups his ear, pretending he cannot hear her. A sudden shout sounds as Margaret screams that she is deeply interested in the young Duke.
Diego flatly refuses to attend the royal ball, leaving Margaret completely stunned. Diego cites his father's recent funeral and his inability to fake sadness.
A soft ah sounds as Diego mentions a partner might protect him, prompting Margaret to speak. Diego immediately rejects attending with Adriana, causing Margaret to gasp in shock. A somber Diego confesses he hates being alone because he grew up lonely. Margaret finds herself momentarily speechless after his unexpected and vulnerable confession. A flustered Margaret quickly shakes off her emotional reaction to his words.
Standing tall, Margaret offers to accompany him to the upcoming royal ball.
Diego teases her about a date, and a sharp ha sounds as Margaret angrily retracts it.
Margaret looks on with concern as Diego mentions having one more problem.
Diego admits he is a terrible dancer and fears public embarrassment.
With a playful smirk, Diego asks his teacher for a possible solution. Bright sunshine illuminates a lush green garden.
A carriage wheel rolls smoothly on stone.
Margaret remains deep in thoughtful silence. Margaret wonders how she arrived here.
Margaret laments how a simple dance lesson turned into an expensive wardrobe overhaul.
Diego insists she needs a grand outfit to appear properly alongside him at the ball. The carriage stops before a prestigious boutique.
A delicate jewel-encrusted floral headpiece sparkles. Intricate white ruffles form a magnificent gown.
Margaret feels overwhelmed by the extravagant and ornate dress she imagines wearing at the ball.
The scene transitions as the story of the immoral family's education continues.
Margaret asks Diego how he plans to explain her presence to others during the ball.
Diego deadpans a cover story about bringing her along out of pity for a governess.
Margaret praises his perfect memorization of the cover story they previously discussed for the ball.
Diego notes that Margaret is willingly putting herself in a very humiliating situation for this plan.
Margaret explains it's to prevent rumors from ruining her future chances of finding a marriage partner.
A sharp ha sounds as Diego mockingly dismisses her romantic talk as they arrive at the shop.
The carriage comes to a halt at the prestigious clothing store as they prepare to exit.
Stepping out first, Diego extends his hand to escort Margaret down from the carriage. Margaret stares at his hand in surprise.
Margaret notes his gentlemanly timing while Diego asks if she plans on getting off soon.
Diego decides to skip the escort for now as they prepare to enter the boutique.
A soft wow sounds as Margaret marvels at the boutique's luxury while Diego watches in silence.
A bell chimes at the entrance.
A polite shop attendant warmly welcomes Diego as they enter the establishment together for their appointment. The attendant offers a choice of tea, fruit juice, or water to the guests as they arrive. A soft yes sounds as the attendant confirms they serve drinks, while Margaret marvels and requests water. Diego asks why she is so nervous, and Margaret admits she is a newcomer to high-end shops.
The head designer finally arrives, apologizing for the delay in greeting them after their arrival.
The designer explains they are swamped with orders due to the upcoming royal ball and apologizes again. After noting the busy season, the exhausted designer asks about the purpose of Diego's visit today.
Diego orders a full ensemble of a dress, gloves, shoes, and accessories for Margaret within 1 week.
The designer reacts with shock as a strict deadline is imposed for the immense project. The designer clarifies the timeline while Diego asks if finishing 3 hours before the ball is possible. Determined to meet the challenge, the designer decides to give it a try. The designer notes that bright colors or white would suit Margaret's fair and elegant complexion. The designer suggests matching Diego's hair, but both agree a white dress would be a good choice. Margaret looks on skeptically as Diego remains focused on the details of her upcoming transformation. The designer begins sketching a gown, suggesting a bolder neckline to complement Margaret's delicate features. A soft sounds as Margaret thoughtfully considers the designer's various fashion recommendations. Pointing to a high-collared sketch, Margaret admits she likes the look but worries about its complexity. The designer excitedly agrees to bring out actual dresses so Margaret can see how they feel in person. Margaret gratefully accepts a glass of water from the attendant before moving on to accessories.
A dazzling collection of blue-gemmed jewelry sparkles brilliantly within its velvet-lined boxes.
Margaret and Diego sit together as the attendant presents a table filled with various luxury items. Margaret's eyes widen as she marvels at the incredible beauty of the expensive jewelry.
Margaret finds herself particularly drawn to an intricate necklace adorned with a large blue gem. Noticing her interest, the smiling attendant encourages a surprised Margaret to try on the piece.
Margaret hesitates, claiming she only meant to look, but the attendant insists on showing the matching set.
Margaret looks stunning as she tries on the necklace and matching ring, glowing with elegance. Diego watches Margaret with a cool gaze while she remains enchanted by the jewelry.
A soft sounds as Margaret reacts to Diego's casual offer to buy the jewelry for her.
Margaret remarks that she must not be a heroine because of how she feels about gifts.
Margaret reflects on how heroines in novels always refuse such extravagant treasures, while she finds them tempting.
Margaret admits she could easily see herself marrying a man who would spoil her with such gifts.
Diego leans in and casually proposes that they get married right then and there.
Diego watches her reaction with a faint, knowing smirk on his face.
Margaret is completely frozen in shock, her eyes wide as she processes his unexpected words.
A soft pot sounds as Margaret begins to laugh at the absurdity of the situation.
Margaret laughs off his proposal, praising Diego for having such a subtle and surprising sense of humor.
Diego leans closer, insisting he isn't joking and would willingly give her everything he owns.
Diego gestures toward the table of luxury items, emphasizing his point about his wealth and willingness.
Diego abruptly orders the designer to buy everything on the table as the dresses finally arrive. Diego insists that Margaret must try on every single dress brought out for her.
Margaret is horrified to learn there are nearly 100 dresses waiting for her to try.
Margaret concludes that her lack of endurance confirms she truly isn't meant to be a heroine.
The sun shines brightly over the elegant boutique as the long day continues inside.
A freshly poured cup of tea sits on the table, forgotten amidst the busy preparations.
Diego patiently reads a magazine while waiting for Margaret to finish her numerous dress changes.
Diego's attention is suddenly pulled away from his book by a request for his input.
Margaret's voice calls out from behind the curtain, signaling she is ready for his review.
A sharp yank and pull sounds as the attendant struggles to tighten Margaret's corset strings properly.
A soft flop sounds as an exhausted Margaret collapses onto her knees after the dressing ordeal.
A heavy thump sounds as Margaret reacts in pure panic upon hearing how many dresses remain.
Margaret groans in exhaustion while the cheerful attendant insists this effort will make her shine.
The designer enters with a serious expression, announcing that the next grand dress is finally ready.
A soft wow sounds as the attendant marvels at Margaret's breathtaking appearance in a magnificent ball gown.
A soft swish sounds as the designer praises Margaret's silhouette, noting how perfectly the dress fits.
Margaret explains that her secret to maintaining such a physique is the constant physical labor of childcare.
A sharp clap sounds as the designer orders the staff to take Margaret to the makeup table.
Margaret worries that makeup is too much, but the designer insists it is vital for the transformation. The designer admits she doesn't usually do makeup herself, but makes a special exception for Margaret.
A soft swish sounds as Margaret removes her glasses, revealing her clear blue eyes to the designer.
Margaret notes the special attention she is receiving, while the designer stares with intense concentration.
The designer begins the makeup application, treating Margaret's face like a precious canvas.
The designer notes that men are incredibly vulnerable to surprises and prepares a final reveal.
The designer tells Margaret to imagine the reaction when she steps through the door as a different person.
Diego looks up with a sharp gaze, ready to see the final result of Margaret's transformation.
Margaret looks off into the distance as delicate white flowers bloom.
Madame Laura enthusiastically prepares to cast a beauty spell with her makeup brush. Margaret quickly rejects Madame Laura's assumptions about her relationship with the Lord. Margaret thoughtfully insists that her relationship with Diego is strictly professional. Margaret explains her role as a governess and attributes Diego's actions to simple kindness.
A sharp clack sounds as Madame Laura dismisses Margaret's naive view of men.
An intense blaze erupts as Madame Laura lectures a confused Margaret on male attraction. Madame Laura reveals that Diego's behavior toward Margaret is exceptionally rare. Margaret questions Diego's interest while Madame Laura playfully brushes her hem. Madame Laura tells Margaret to look at her final transformation.
Margaret stands revealed in a magnificent, lace-covered ball gown.
Margaret marvels at her reflection, feeling like a heroine from a novel.
A soft push sounds as Madame Laura sends Margaret out for the reveal.
Madame Laura encourages her to return if her time at the ball goes well.
A heavy gulp sounds as a nervous Margaret prepares to face Diego.
A soft click sounds as Margaret resolves to show off the dress. Shop staff marvel as Margaret prepares to make her grand entrance. Diego waits patiently as Margaret approaches him within the shop. Diego looks up and is immediately stunned by Margaret's striking appearance.
Margaret softly asks Diego to give his opinion on her outfit. Margaret stands elegantly before a mesmerized and silent Diego. A soft scratch sounds as an awkward Margaret questions her ensemble. Diego remains speechless, unable to look away from her. A dazed Diego blushes, visibly affected by her beautiful transformation.
A sharp volt sounds as Margaret prompts the silent Diego for a reaction.
A loud ahem sounds as Diego suddenly expresses concern about the ball. A nervous fidget sounds while Diego admits he is reconsidering their attendance. A soft puffed sounds as Margaret highlights the dress's fine imported silk. A soft swish sounds as Diego reaches toward Margaret's face.
Diego gently points out that she has something on her lips.
Diego uses his thumb to gently wipe away some makeup from her lip.
A heavy step sounds as Madame Laura arrives to see the couple together.
Madame Laura laughs and asks for Diego's final opinion on the dress.
Diego critiques the waist size while still appearing slightly flustered.
A soft rustle sounds as Diego touches the dress to check the fit. Diego pulls her close and decides to purchase the gown immediately.
The sky turns a deep purple as the evening approaches.
An awkward clunk sounds as the pair rides in the carriage together. A soft ahem sounds as Margaret tries to break the tense silence.
Margaret asks about the mysterious box Diego is holding in his sack.
Diego holds the small blue jewelry box firmly in his hand. A weary sigh sounds as both deny the gift is for themselves.
Margaret wonders about the true recipient of the mysterious gift.
An annoyed sounds as Margaret asks if it is for the children.
Margaret reacts with shock while Diego lets out an exhausted sigh. Diego confesses that being with Margaret makes him feel like a better person.
Margaret jokes that he sounds like a criminal despite his dangerous reputation.
A soft "oh" sounds as Margaret remembers his true background as a murderer.
Margaret warmly insists that Diego is truly a good person at heart.
Margaret praises Diego for treating her and the children with such kindness. Diego wonders aloud if being a governess is difficult work.
A rattle sounds as Margaret admits she occasionally finds Lord Cedric's antics and Lady Cecilia's safety quite stressful.
A shrug sounds as Margaret admits the children are generally well-behaved, leading Diego to wonder what her life would be like without the bankruptcy.
Margaret admits she is uncertain but feels genuinely happy with how her life has unfolded. Margaret expresses her distaste for the boredom of being a typical noble wife, stating she takes great pride in her profession.
Diego observes how idleness affects people, while Margaret insists every job is meaningful and serves a purpose in life.
A jolt sounds as Margaret reacts with visible surprise to Diego's unexpected prompt.
Diego looks at Margaret and flatly remarks that her level of boredom is enough to make him cry.
Diego continues to study her, wondering how someone with her personality and outlook came to be. Diego notes that her resilient nature would be easier to understand if she had grown up with wealth and love instead of poverty.
A fiddle sounds as Diego reflects on whether his own nature is a product of his upbringing or his own inherent faults.
A proverb describes how love often departs a home the moment poverty arrives at the front door.
Margaret remembers how the stress of their dwindling wealth transformed her once gentle mother into a volatile and irritable person.
Margaret reflects on the difficult moment she realized she had to make a life-altering choice for her future.
Margaret recalls weighing the option of staying home to suffer with her family or seeking a new life in the capital.
Margaret remembers her resolve to leave and establish herself as the head of her own independent household.
Diego notes that people facing extreme hardship are rarely able to maintain compassion for others. Margaret thinks to herself about the secret past she has never shared with Diego.
Margaret reflects on the striking similarities between her current situation and the life she lived previously.
Margaret finds strength in the memory of the abundant love she received in her past life.
This internal reservoir of love provides her with the compassion she needs to care for others.
A fidget sounds while Margaret worries that sharing her truth might unintentionally belittle Diego's own tragic history.
A clock sounds as Diego closes the jewelry box, noting that humans often foolishly desire to change the past.
Diego somberly acknowledges that it is impossible for anyone to erase the mistakes they have made in the past.
Diego looks at Margaret and asks if his perspective makes him seem foolish to her.
A shut sounds as Diego closes the jewelry box, satisfied by her response. Diego hands the jewelry box over and instructs Margaret to give the gift to Cecilia on his behalf.
Margaret objects, insisting the gift will only be truly meaningful if he presents it to his sister himself.
Margaret watches with concern as Diego remains distant and hesitant to approach the children directly.
Diego looks away, admitting he doesn't understand the intended meaning behind such a gesture.
A whoa sounds as Cecilia gasps in amazement at the beautiful jewelry.
Cecilia is completely dazzled as she holds the exquisite new ornament in her hands.
A clack sounds as Margaret smiles and asks the young girl if she is pleased with the beautiful present.
A woo sounds as Cecilia marvels at her reflection after Margaret places the jewelry in her hair.
A smack sounds as Margaret lifts Cecilia up while expressing a sudden, lingering concern about the situation.
Cecilia looks at her reflection with a serious expression and declares that she looks just like a princess.
Margaret warmly agrees, pointing out how perfectly the jewelry complements the color of the girl's eyes.
A thud sounds as Margaret stands behind Cecilia, asking her to acknowledge the excellent taste of the person who gave it to her.
Margaret leans in and reveals that the beautiful gift was actually chosen by Lord Diego. Cecilia looks up in confusion, asking if the governess is referring to her brother Diego.
A falter sounds as a confused Cecilia questions why her brother would suddenly decide to give her such a present.
Margaret laughs and encourages the young girl to make sure she thanks him personally when they next meet. Margaret adjusts the ornament and tells Cecilia there is one more important detail she needs to remember.
A whisper sounds as Margaret instructs the girl to keep the gift a secret from Lord Cedric for the time being. A tilt and step sound as Cecilia asks why they need to keep it a secret while someone approaches from behind.
A flinch sounds as Margaret realizes someone has overheard their conversation about the secret gift.
Cedric stands behind them with a dark aura, demanding to know what secret they are discussing.
Cedric remains silent and stern as he stares at Margaret and Cecilia.
A whip sounds as a panicked Margaret waves her hands and tries to convince Cedric that he simply misheard her.
An oops sounds as the bright jewelry remains perfectly visible and highlighted in Cecilia's hair.
Lord Cedric points at the jewelry in Cecilia's hair and asks what it is, while a confused girl questions if he is referring to her ornament.
Margaret remains silent as she internally pleads with Cecilia to keep the secret of the gift.
Cecilia beams with joy as the beautiful ornament shines in her hair.
A heavy thump sounds as Cedric stares in shock and demands to know what is happening. Cedric turns to Margaret to confirm the truth and asks why he didn't receive a present. Margaret looks away awkwardly as she struggles to find a response.
A loud yelling and shouting sound as Margaret recalls Diego's instructions to give the gift to only one person, while she wonders why he only prepared one.
Cedric remains upset and continues to stare at Margaret.
A sharp point sounds as Cedric notices Margaret's new necklace and remarks that he hasn't seen it before.
A dramatic da-dun sounds as Cedric asks if Diego bought the necklace for her, leaving a panicked Margaret to worry about his suspicion. A soft ahem sounds as Margaret lies and claims she bought the necklace with her own salary, prompting Cedric to call her a liar. A teary wail sounds as Cedric bursts into tears and cruelly insults Margaret's financial status while calling her Estella.
A soft trickle sounds as Margaret grows annoyed with the young lord's lack of consideration for those who are less fortunate.
The intricate gold and purple gemstone necklace is shown in exquisite detail. And sounds as Margaret admits to herself that the wealthy young lord has quite a discerning eye for quality. A loud stretch sounds as Margaret pinches Cedric's cheeks and asks how she could possibly afford a real piece of jewelry while he continues to accuse Diego.
Margaret looks down thoughtfully as she considers her next move.
A soft droop sounds as Cedric pouts and holds his sore cheek.
Margaret wonders why the brothers are so obsessed with the topic of marriage and firmly denies any such thing.
A flap and wail sound as Cedric repeats rumors about Diego wanting to marry her, leaving a shocked Margaret to wave her arms in protest.
A low seethe sounds as Margaret decides to leave for the day, telling the children she will listen to them tomorrow.
A quick dash sounds as Margaret flees the room while Cedric yells for her to step.
A heavy huff and pant sound as Margaret leans against a wall to catch her breath while Cedric continues to yell that she cannot marry his brother. Margaret reflects on how Cedric is overreacting about the possibility of her becoming his brother's wife.
A glint sounds as Margaret confidently thinks that she has never been told she is lacking in any area.
Margaret quickly catches herself and admits that she didn't quite mean to sound so arrogant.
A soft clack sounds as Margaret reaches the balcony and spots Diego waiting for her below.
Diego looks up and catches Margaret's eye as she observes him from above.
A heavy step sounds as Margaret approaches Diego, who complains that he almost died of boredom while waiting for her. Diego holds his open palm out toward Margaret.
Diego suggests they should practice their dance as if it were the real event, while Margaret looks on with surprise.
Diego smiles and reminds her that they are there for dance practice. Margaret looks determined and states she will be asking for overtime pay, which leads Diego to suggest she could empty their entire warehouse as payment. A firm clasp sounds as they join hands to begin their practice.
They begin the dance as the count is called out. They move in sync as the dance steps and turns are counted.
A hold sounds as Diego places his hand on her waist and instructs her to step lightly as if she is supporting him.
A soft pull sounds as Diego draws her closer to him while guiding her through the steps. A whisper sounds as Diego leans in close to her ear and asks if his guidance is helpful, leaving Margaret looking flustered. A soft ahem sounds as Margaret mentions that Lord Cedric has been sulking all afternoon, leading Diego to wonder if it's because of him.
Margaret reminds Diego that he only gave Cecilia a gift, which made the girl happy but left Cedric feeling neglected. A shrug sounds as Margaret explains that Cedric wasn't interested in jewelry, and that a gift should be something the recipient actually likes.
Diego decides to buy Cedric a gift immediately, causing Margaret to think he is acting as proud as a mischievous child. Diego looks serious and notes that children are very sensitive to favoritism.
Diego looks at Margaret and asks if she is also guilty of playing favorites.
A lean sounds as Diego moves closer and notes that she is thinking about the children during his dance class.
A heavy gulp sounds as Diego tells Margaret to pay more attention to him in this moment.
A loud but dumb sounds as Margaret stares into Diego's eyes, feeling the intensity of the moment.
A low chuckle sounds as the atmosphere between them grows more intimate.
A quick twirl sounds as Diego spins Margaret around and asks if he should lead her through the next turn.
Diego questions Margaret's supposed lack of talent after seeing her impressive dance moves.
Margaret holds his hand while firmly maintaining that she is not a good dancer.
Margaret accuses her employer of manufacturing a reason for her to work overtime.
Diego notes her skill makes lessons unnecessary as they perform a coordinated turn.
A frustrated sounds as Margaret realizes he is far too proficient to lack confidence. Margaret observes him closely, her suspicion growing. A graceful swoosh sounds as Diego dips her, leaving Margaret momentarily bewildered. A snicker sounds while Margaret quivers and trembles, asking if he truly is a beginner. Diego chuckles while admitting that taking every advantage is his secret to success. A pained keg sounds as Margaret begs for help while her back reaches its limit. A firm step sounds as Diego moves closer to offer a sincere apology for his teasing. An irked Margaret questions his sudden change in character as he defends his ability to apologize. Margaret explains her behavior was purely for her own amusement and offers no excuses. A soft scratch and sparkle sound while Diego wonders if she is still angry with him. A twinkle sounds as Margaret reminds him of her promised pay while noting his lethal charm. Diego offers to fulfill any request as compensation for his trickery. Margaret brings up the topic of Lady Adriana, but Diego immediately shuts down the suggestion. A humph sounds as Margaret finds it absurd to equate a marriage proposal with a small lie.
A weary sigh sounds as Margaret requests that he also buy a gift for Lord Cedric.
Diego looks at her and confirms he is listening to her request.
Margaret points out how much joy his previous gift brought to the young girl. Margaret smiles warmly as she reflects on the impact of his generosity. A lean sounds as Margaret emphasizes the importance of giving the boy a present as well.
Aha sounds as Diego agrees Kamerkans.
A confused pardon sounds as Margaret asks if there is an issue with her request. A reach sounds as Diego extends his hand and asks for another dance.
Margaret smiles and prepares to accept his invitation.
A clasp sounds as they join hands once more. A graceful twirl sounds as they move in unison. A lean sounds as the pair draws closer together during their dance. Diego suggests they provide their own music by humming.
A freeze sounds as an intruder's voice catches the dancing pair off guard.
Lord Cedric stands at the doorway, quivering and trembling with fury.
A panicked Margaret realizes her situation is hopeless and declares herself doomed.
A crackle sounds while Margaret attempts a desperate explanation and the boy rejects her words. Cedric's hand quivers and trembles as he processes the scene before him.
Cedric envisions his brother as a master of dance while a confused Margaret watches him.
A dash sounds as the crying boy flees the room, leaving Margaret to call after him.
Cecilia stands on the staircase and asks why her brother made such a hasty exit.
Cecilia flashes a mischievous grin while confessing she witnessed the entire encounter. A blush sounds as Margaret yells in exasperation at the children's behavior.
Cecilia playfully mimics a dramatic dance pose with a rose.
A hic and arg sound as Margaret laments being harassed by the Bertha siblings.
A light-hearted hee-hee sounds as the scene shifts toward a grand architectural structure. Night falls over the elaborate and towering spires of the royal palace.
A yawn and step sound as a black-haired man is approached by a woman with long red hair.
The dark-haired man looks at her with a stoic and unimpressed expression. A clock sounds as a red-haired woman in a dark gown addresses the man as a prince. A whistle and laughter sound as the woman mocks his habits and compares him to a flirtatious rogue. Dark thorny branches frame a realization as a woman admits she never imagined the man was the crown prince.
A scoff sounds as the dark-haired prince smirks with confidence.
A quick glance sounds as the prince admits he was equally confused by the revelation. An irked sound follows as the prince questions why Countess Avril would enter a man's bedroom so late at night. The prince points out her hypocrisy regarding her public behavior and private desires while she looks on dismissively.
The prince asks if his point would be easier to understand if he were more direct.
A lean sounds as the prince moves close to ask about High Priest Delmer, leaving the countess visibly shocked. A grin sounds as the prince enjoys the countess's stunned silence.
A scowl and turn sound as Camilla denies understanding the question, while the prince reacts with a skeptical hum.
A slip sounds as the prince puts a hand in his pocket and tells the countess to stop being evasive. Countess Camilla looks panicked as she senses her secret is being exposed. A flap sounds as the prince produces a letter and accuses her of having an affair with his father's arch-nemesis. The countess gasps in disbelief at the sight of the incriminating envelope.
A reach sounds as Camilla lunges for the letter while the prince mockingly dismisses her attempt.
The prince leans in and warns her to be more selective about her messengers when sending love letters.
The prince mocks the countess by noting she sounds like a sentimental young girl in her writing.
A grit sounds as the countess seethes with anger at the prince's taunts.
A shrug sounds as the prince reads her love letter aloud while she calls him despicable.
Camilla demands an explanation for his behavior and begs to be left alone.
A scoff sounds as the prince claims he takes no joy in confronting her about her infidelity. A shrug and oh sound as the prince admits he doesn't personally care about her purity, but warns of his father's traditional views.
The prince explains he is only intervening because her actions are hurting his friend.
Camilla correctly guesses he is acting on behalf of the eldest son of House Bertha, which he confirms with a bingo.
The prince notes her surprisingly deep friendship with Duchess Bertha.
A whisper and murmur sound as the prince recalls the gossip regarding Camilla's crude rise to nobility.
A swish sounds as a flashback shows Camilla being introduced into high society as Countess Camilla Avril.
The flashback continues as a blonde noblewoman offers Camilla her friendship based on their shared interests.
A clench sounds as the prince asks if she values anything more than that friendship.
The prince puts on a happy facade and suggests everything will work out for the best.
A flinch sounds as the prince offers to return the letter and finalize their negotiation.
A smile sounds as the prince asks if she is ready to take her property back.
A gulp and grab sound as Camilla takes the letter while wondering why he surrendered his leverage so easily.
The prince halts her departure by stating there is one specific condition to their agreement.
A shrug sounds as the prince reveals he will be keeping the high priest's reply as collateral.
An irked sound as Camilla realizes she has fallen into his trap.
A wag sounds as a chibi fox prince celebrates his cunning while Camilla calls him a sly fox.
A whip sounds as Camilla asks what his future demands will be while he says he needs time to think.
The prince mockingly claims to be pleased that a mother figure like her finds him cute.
The prince stands over her and questions if she is wasting her youth by selling it for money.
A scoff sounds as the prince suggests she should leave his father and start over while she is still young.
Camilla tries to downplay her actions as harmless fun with the high priest.
A symbolic vision of a bed appears as the prince suggests their true intentions are revealed in their private talks.
The prince questions whether she was truly enjoying herself or just looking for information.
A spider hangs in its web, mirroring the entanglement of their conversation.
A shrug and lean sound as Camilla claims they only exchanged romantic whispers, though the prince remains doubtful.
The prince moves in close and labels her a woman who finds pleasure in betrayal.
Glowing blue flowers shimmer in the darkness.
A tap sounds as Camilla touches his chin and admits she has no interest in immature men.
A pat sounds as the prince asks if that explains her preference for older, dry men.
Camilla retorts that older men have more to offer than the mere youth of useless boys. A soft slide sounds as the black-haired prince remarks that his efforts yield high returns. A sudden whip sounds while the prince tells Countess Camilla they should leave and a maid acknowledges her.
A quick turn sounds as the prince questions the countess about whispering love to the high priest.
And scoff sounds follow as the chibi prince suspects the woman was trying to extort a man who stole her from his enemy.
The prince halts in his tracks. A weary sigh sounds while the prince watches from a window and describes the countess as repulsive.
A sharp clack sounds against lace.
Lord Diego asks Margaret if she remembers what she is supposed to tell people tonight.
A weary ha sounds as Diego suggests he took her in out of charity, and she agrees the story is perfect.
Diego shoots her a quick glance.
Diego notes that Margaret looks like an entirely different person today.
A light-hearted ha-ha sounds as Margaret questions if he is lying, while Diego asks if he has ever been dishonest with her.
A sudden reach sounds while Diego tells her to enjoy herself and fully immerse herself in the role.
Diego looks at Margaret and tells her she looks very beautiful.
They firmly join hands together.
Margaret looks at the grand chandelier and thinks about how this ball will decide the fate of many people. A nervous gulp sounds upon entry.
Music fills the ornate ballroom.
Guests remark on the quality of the music is here.
An older woman expresses her surprise. They walk together through the crowd. A lighthearted ha-ha sounds while an older couple greets Marquess Permens and expresses surprise at Lord Diego's attendance.
A warm smile sounds as Diego admits he initially did not want to attend.
Margaret observes that he was a strict man who took his role as head of the house seriously.
A rhythmic nod sounds while Diego admits he now realizes his father would have wanted him there, and the woman pities him. An older man suggests the late Duke Bertha would have been proud of his son.
The woman hopes the king approves of the succession soon so the House of Bertha can recover.
Margaret is stunned as the woman expresses hope that everything will return to normal.
A heavy tremble sounds while Margaret realizes he is telling a massive lie without any hesitation. Chills and a mumble sound as Margaret imagines him laughing at a grave and labels all men as sly foxes. A startled gasp sounds from Margaret.
A soft gosh and ha-ha sound as the older couple continues their conversation.
A group begins to swarm them. A swarm and crowd sound while women ask about Margaret's dress and jewelry while she asks for one question at a time.
A soft slide sounds as Diego claims they chose the dress together.
Margaret reacts with stunned silence. A firm hold sounds while Diego claims he pestered a dressmaker relentlessly to find the right fabric.
An impressed oh my and ha-ha sound as a woman confirms his story.
A soft ahem sounds as the group asks for an introduction and Margaret offers to introduce herself.
Diego calls out to Miss Montiel. Diego asks if she was supposed to exchange greetings with her mentor today.
A confused Margaret wonders about a mentor while Diego tells her she can leave to find them now.
A soft whisper sounds as Diego leans in to mention she hasn't eaten yet.
A quiet murmur sounds while Margaret excuses herself and the women wonder what they were discussing. A polite ha-ha sounds as Diego excuses himself for a prior engagement while the guests are shocked by his departure. A quick dash sounds while Margaret flees the crowd as the women lament their hearts fluttering. A sudden rush sounds as she celebrates. A relieved ha-ha sounds while Margaret celebrates escaping the awkward situation.
Margaret stops and wonders why he actually sent her away.
Margaret recalls Diego saying he wouldn't go to the ball because of his father's funeral and realizes it was just an excuse to bring her.
A sudden sound startles Margaret. Her stomach rumbles loudly as she eyes the food.
She postpones her questions till later.
A firm tug pulls him back.
Margaret turns to see a silver-haired woman looking at her with wide eyes.
The silver-haired woman swallows nervously as a gulp sounds. She excitedly claims that Margaret was the only person she could see from a distance.
Margaret privately notes that the woman wears a plain dress for a high noble.
She concludes that the woman is undoubtedly the dazzling female lead of the story. A grin sounds as the two women share a cheerful and warm greeting.
A sharp jolt interrupts them.
The silver-haired woman asks about a favor while a waiter enters the scene.
Margaret leans in to share a secretive whisper with the waiter nearby.
The silver-haired woman looks on with a confused expression as a gesture is made.
A firm, quick grab stops the silver-haired woman as she tries to move.
Margaret brightly suggests that they move their conversation to the private balcony.
The scene shifts to the balcony. A quick step sounds nearby. A man wonders aloud why the woman requested such a secluded meeting.
He suspects that she had a hidden motive for bringing him there.
A sharp tisk sounds warningly.
Diego demands better negotiation terms than what she previously offered him. He reiterates his desire for a more favorable deal this time.
The scene continues as he looms over the silver-haired woman in the moonlight. She identifies the man as Lord Diego with a nervous, soft breath.
A bow sounds as she apologizes for requesting a meeting without his prior permission. She fidgets while expressing deep regret for causing him displeasure regarding Miss Margaret.
A weary sigh sounds as Diego invites her to try and persuade him.
Diego watches her with coldness. He questions whether any circumstances have changed to warrant a new round of negotiations. A flinch and clench sound as she desperately admits she has nothing left.
She begs him for mercy as she faces his overwhelming presence.
A scoff follows his retection.
He leans in and tells her that he is already well aware of her situation. Diego mentions her fall from grace in House Estes and her impending forced marriage. A falter sounds as she asks how he discovered her deepest secrets.
A sigh sounds as she realizes he has thoroughly investigated her background.
A clutch sounds while she decides she has absolutely nothing more to lose.
Adriana desperately threatens to use a secret she knows to bring him down with her.
A scoff and flinch sound as Diego addresses Lady Adriana and scorns her reckless behavior.
He remains completely unfazed by the threats of a desperate woman.
He warns that exposing his secret would only prompt her father to lock her away.
A vision shows Adriana strapped to a bed behind bars, illustrating his grim threat.
Overwhelming chills run through Adriana as the weight of her failure sinks in.
She realizes she has failed and that he would follow through without hesitation.
Her knees hit the floor.
Adriana sinks into a desperate kneel and asks what she must do. A tremble sounds while she asks for his price, though he says it isn't necessary. Tears well up in her eyes.
A lift sounds as Diego helps her up and instructs her to find the crown prince.
A soft sniffle sounds while Lady Adriana looks at Lord Diego with wide, teary eyes, and he tells her to listen very carefully to his words.
Diego explains that his goal is to simply swap the man in her current plan for someone more advantageous.
He notes that being involved with the crown prince will cancel marriage talks with Granton III, making her father believe he can sell her off at a much higher price. Chibi Adriana wonders why the crown prince would ever help her, and Chibi Diego clarifies it is because he will get something in return, since he never works for free.
Adriana looks up at the man and asks why he is going through all this effort for her sake.
A smirk plays on his lips as Diego admits he is definitely not doing this without expecting something in return.
A rhythmic nod sounds as Diego states his first condition is her absolute silence regarding his secret, and the girl agrees immediately.
A sudden reach sounds while the man notes that her compliance is a very good idea.
Diego tells her she needs to leave now and perform one final task for him, leaving her looking stunned.
Back in the ballroom, a man extends his hand and asks a lady if he may have the pleasure of a dance.
A firm sound echoes as Miss Margaret politely refuses the man, explaining that she is currently waiting for her partner.
As the man seethes and fumes, Margaret mentally notes that this was her 12th refusal of the night.
She observes that no one has remained persistent after being rejected. Margaret thinks that if someone tried to be more serious about flirting, they would likely be labeled an idiot by the crowd.
A startled huh sounds as a man hears that the woman came with Lord Diego Bertha and begins to sweat.
A sudden zoom sounds while the man flees in terror, leaving Margaret to wonder why everyone is running away. She watches them depart and thinks about how they all just run off without a second word. A steady step sounds as Margaret suspects Diego must have said something strange to the guests while she was away.
A sudden step sounds as the crown prince approaches Margaret and asks why she is standing all by herself.
He moves closer and remarks that a partner should never leave such a beautiful lady on her own.
The black-haired man concludes that Diego must be a truly lousy partner for abandoning her.
Margaret looks at him with a deadpan expression and asks if he has anything else to say, leaving the man confused.
A hearty laugh sounds while the man finds her reaction amusing, though Margaret remains puzzled by his behavior.
A sharp top sounds as the man places his hand against the wall behind her.
He leans in close, trapping her against the pillar in the dimly lit ballroom. A grin sounds as the man looks down at her with a confident, charming expression. A sudden falter sounds as Margaret asks if he is Diego's friend, and he admits he is, but claims he came specifically to see her.
A soft chuckle sounds while the man notes that the stone-hearted Diego seems close to his siblings now and likely owes that change to her.
An irked expression crosses Margaret's face as she listens to him speak about Diego.
He remains leaning over her, maintaining their close and intimate proximity.
A confused huh sounds while the man suggests that she shouldn't speak ill of a friend in such a manner. They continue their quiet confrontation as he watches her reactions closely. Margaret retorts that if Diego hasn't shown him consideration, perhaps it's because the man doesn't meet the requirements for being worthy of such kindness.
A blank and sweat sound as the prince is momentarily stunned by her sharp tongue, while Margaret maintains a cool, dismissive gaze.
A firm squeeze sounds while Margaret looks down at her hands and realizes she might have been too harsh.
A nervous sound follows as Margaret wonders if she went overboard with her insults toward him.
An sounds while Margaret looks at her expensive dress and jewelry, realizing it would be rude to speak badly about Diego after all he gave her. The man notes that she seems to enjoy using unique titles, calling him a lord and Diego a good man.
A sudden lean sounds while Margaret asks if he isn't a young lord or perhaps married, and he explains that most people use a different title for him.
A scoff sounds as the man clarifies that he has absolutely no plans to get married whatsoever.
A lighthearted ha-ha sounds while Margaret thinks his decision is unusual given his looks, but he insists that is just how things turned out. A silent reflection appears as the narration explains that once a man's pure heart is trampled on, he becomes skeptical of all women. A smile sounds as the man looks at her with a knowing and slightly melancholy gaze. A quiet sounds while Margaret looks at him, reconsidering her initial impression. Margaret thinks she initially took him for a playboy, but wonders if he might actually be a romantic at heart. A sharp clack sounds from the floor nearby. A sudden stagger sounds as a figure enters the scene unexpectedly. A startled gasp sounds from Margaret as she recognizes Lady Adriana appearing before them. A quick wipe sounds while Margaret asks what is wrong as the other girl looks distressed. A soft sniffle sounds as Adriana apologizes to Miss Margaret and thanks her for all the trouble she went through to help.
Margaret feels trapped with no other options while a frustrated sounds. Adriana thanks Margaret for her kindness and offers her dowry while Margaret lets out a loud arg.
A firm hold sounds as Margaret grasps her hands and tells her not to say such things.
Margaret insists there is another way and warns that giving up now means the end for her.
Margaret looks at the other girl with intense determination.
A sudden dash sounds as Margaret runs away, leaving the other girl standing alone.
A sharp throb and pinch sound while Adriana pinches her own thigh to force out some tears.
Adriana thinks the only price was a throbbing thigh, but wonders if Miss Margaret will be all right.
A quick whip sounds as Adriana turns to see the black-haired prince standing behind her.
A weary sigh sounds while the prince tells Adriana she just ruined a perfectly normal person's life. The prince wonders what Diego did to be called a good man while Adriana's inner fox persona smirks. A sudden jolt sounds as Adriana's attention is caught by something.
A formal bow sounds while Adriana greets the man.
The prince remarks that she saved him the trouble of going to find her. He extends his hand toward her in a silent invitation. The prince takes her hand and says they should go meet her despicable father.
Back at the balcony, a soft ha sounds while Margaret looks out at the night sky.
A sudden creak sounds as Margaret leans her hands against the balcony railing. Margaret joins Lord Diego on the balcony where he stands looking out over the grounds.
Diego looks at her while flowers frame the quiet moment between them.
A quick flip sounds while Diego addresses Miss Margaret.
Margaret admits she is very angry and is sure he knows the reason why. A quick glance sounds while she notes the coldness in his voice. She thinks his voice sounds exactly like it did when they first met.
A formal bow sounds while Margaret apologizes for taking advantage of her privilege.
Amidst the clamor and murmur of the guests, Margaret insists she had no other intentions.
A man with white hair holds a glass and begins to explain his actions.
He says he couldn't ignore her trouble just as the prince and Adriana arrive to greet the crowd. Diego asks if she truly wanted to save Lady Adriana, catching Margaret by surprise.
A soft whoosh sounds as Diego addresses Miss Margaret in the moonlight.
Diego asks if she wants him to help Adriana, even if it means he has to marry her.
A nervous gulp sounds while Diego asks if she only cares about being a good person. Diego continues to stare at her with a stern and questioning expression. He asks if he is expected to shoulder the entire burden all on his own.
Margaret realizes she never knew Diego was feeling this way about the situation.
She reflects that she is the only one who knows Diego and Adriana are meant to be together.
She thinks she's the only one who knows Adriana's misfortune isn't her destiny, explaining her fixation on them.
A sudden clutch sounds while Margaret denies having any such intentions.
A quick step sounds as Margaret apologizes for her shameless behavior.
Her eyes widen in a moment of sudden realization.
A thought appears noting that Diego isn't just some paper doll to be moved around.
The reflection continues, stating he is a real human being with his own thoughts and feelings. Margaret realizes she never once considered how Diego himself would feel about her plans.
A firm step sounds while Diego asks what she will give him in return for helping Lady Adriana.
A sudden falter sounds while Margaret wonders what a mere governess could offer a future duke. A steady step sounds as Diego closes the distance between them.
Diego tells Miss Margaret that he is going to propose his offer to her once again.
Diego looks down at her and bluntly asks her to get engaged to him.
Margaret looks stunned while Diego explains that an engagement will allow him to help Lady Adriana.
He clarifies that he isn't interested in Adriana, but will do it because she is so keen on helping. A startled huh sounds as Diego asks why she is questioning him, and Margaret asks what he means.
Margaret wonders why he chose her when many noble ladies desire him.
A weary sigh sounds as Diego prepares to explain himself one more time. Margaret asks if marrying Adriana wouldn't accomplish his goal.
A soft swoosh sounds while Diego insists things would be different.
Diego looks at Margaret and says he trusts her.
Diego mentions a woman who met a tragic end due to marital betrayal.
Memories of a broken past surface.
Diego calls her naive for thinking he is good.
Diego calls her wise and genuinely good.
A sudden badoom sounds while Margaret begins to affect.
A light-hearted ha-ha sounds as Margaret wonders if her heart fluttered despite her ruined status.
A soft chuckle sounds while Diego tells her not to worry.
Diego notes the former Duchess lacks a grand noble background.
A sudden reach sounds as Diego plans a public display of affection.
He promises that an engagement will stop people from looking down on her.
Margaret notes his thoroughness leaves her no room to refuse.
Margaret tells him to honor his promise to save Adriana.
Diego gives his word.
Elsewhere, the prince vows Adriana won't be sold.
Margaret looks down at her dress.
Diego looks at her with a serious expression. A firm clasp sounds as Margaret agrees to accept his proposal.
Heavy stomp sounds echo through the hallway.
A loud slam sounds while a bird flutters away.
Margaret looks distressed by the sudden turn of events. Diego's young brother seethes and fumes in the doorway. A loud shout sounds as the boy accuses her of breaking her promise.
A sudden rush sounds while the boy calls her a liar.
Margaret thinks about how some things are beyond a child's understanding.
A sharp stab sounds as the boy questions Diego's motives for marrying someone poor.
The boy screams that she is a poor match for Diego.
A sudden grab sounds while Margaret asks what he truly can't handle.
Margaret thrashes and flails the boy for his early morning intrusion.
A loud slam sounds as the boy is tossed out.
A wham and bam sound while Margaret smirks at the boy's tantrum. Margaret notes she was too tired to put her dress away. A quiet pause sounds as she examines the jewelry.
Margaret questions the reality of her upcoming engagement.
Margaret looks at her reflection and feels doubtful.
Margaret reflects on the unpredictability of her current life.
A sharp clatter sounds as Diego abruptly tells Margaret she is fired. Margaret is stunned by his sudden announcement.
Margaret remains confused by the abrupt change.
Diego drinks and repeats his decision to fire her.
Margaret finds him completely impossible to understand.
Margaret wonders why their previous conversation mattered.
The scene shifts back to the Grand Manor.
A rewind effect shifts the scene back one day. The scene returns to Margaret accepting the proposal.
Diego holds Margaret close in the moonlight while she looks on in surprise.
A devious smirk sounds while Diego gazes at Margaret with intense focus.
Diego prepares to weave a romantic tale for their cover story while Margaret listens skeptically.
Margaret looks doubtful about his plan to fabricate their romantic history.
Margaret's elegant blue gown is shown in exquisite detail.
Diego thinks about how to portray her as a virtuous woman who healed his broken heart.
A vision of a maternal figure with children appears as part of their cover story.
Diego remains focused on the strategic details of their faux romance.
Diego tells Margaret she was a comfort during his father's death, prompting her to joke about his writing skills.
Diego notes their shared living space is the perfect setting for love, while Margaret smiles softly.
Margaret playfully suggests adding that she always dreamed of having her own family.
A soft shimmer sounds as Diego leans in close, catching Margaret off guard.
Diego asks what her story for him will be, leaving her blushing and speechless.
A light scuff sounds as Margaret asks him to move back, but he insists they must practice being intimate.
A frustrated sounds while Margaret tries to delay their practice session.
Diego asks if she prefers pet names like Honey or Darling, causing Margaret to let out a startled scream.
Margaret wonders how she will explain falling for him, while Diego ponders the question.
A heavy thud sounds as Diego walks away, stating that no one will ever ask why she fell for him.
Diego confidently asserts that falling for a man like him is the only obvious outcome. Margaret is furious as she recalls their intimate conversation from the previous day. Diego tells her to calm down and insists that being fired isn't a punishment.
Diego explains that he cannot continue to pay a monthly salary to his own fiancée. A quick clatter sounds as Diego eats, telling her she can still see the children.
Diego suggests her lessons become playtime, leading Margaret to realize she is being asked to work for free.
Diego promises her a massive personal allowance, and a bright twinkle sounds in Margaret's eyes.
A sharp gasp sounds as Margaret processes the news of her new income.
A soft clink sounds as Diego says he won't check her spending, provided she keeps her word.
Margaret takes a bite of her meal, considering the new arrangement. A sudden pfft sounds as Diego announces the engagement ceremony will happen in just 2 weeks.
Margaret is shocked by the rush timeline, but Diego insists it is possible if they scale down. Preparation for the banquet begins with invitations, wine, and elegant attire.
Margaret worries about the dressmaker's reaction, but Diego notes they gave her a whole extra week this time.
A quiet clink sounds as Margaret firmly states that her father should not be invited.
A weary sigh sounds while Diego agrees and plans to bring her mother and sibling instead.
A quick wave sounds as Diego suggests inviting friends, but Margaret admits she doesn't have any.
A comical wah sounds as Margaret recalls being an outcast among the high society ladies.
A soft swish sounds while Diego guarantees that everything is about to change for her.
Diego promises that everyone who mistreated her will soon regret their actions.
Margaret is bewildered by the pile of envelopes, which Diego reveals are invitations specifically for her.
The noble ladies are eager to meet the new face of the Berta Duchy and see some drama. Margaret looks at the stack of invitations with a mix of awe and hesitation.
Margaret reflects on how she has truly become a Cinderella overnight.
A rattle sounds as a maid arrives, while Diego tells Margaret to attend a few events to find companions.
A soft swish sounds while Margaret doubts she can make friends so quickly, but Diego is confident.
A light clink sounds as Margaret focuses on her dessert.
A sharp snap sounds while Diego offers a bet to prove everyone will be desperate to know her.
Regal symbols of the duchy's wealth and status are displayed.
Madame Laura is overjoyed to see Margaret and celebrate her success. Margaret is flustered by the attention, while Laura claims she knew this day would come.
A soft rustle sounds as Laura offers to share a top-secret scoop with Margaret.
Madame Laura leans in close to confirm that she has an exclusive secret to share.
Madame Laura leans into Margaret and reveals that her scandalous news centers on the young Duke of Berta's hidden romantic history.